Chapter 41. After obtaining the peerless martial art, Ningxu began to practice martial arts without sleep or food. Forgetting food was impossible. She ate too much every day. She couldn't forget even if she wanted to. Every time Ningxu ate, Yuandong would look at her with a conflicted expression. Every time the princess ate, her stomach would bulge. Then, after 4 hours, her stomach would disappear. It was a shocking sight. Yuandong wanted to persuade the princess, but every time she met the princess's gaze, she felt inexplicably guilty. It was as if the deepest thoughts in her heart had been cut open and exposed under the sun. Yuandong was too lazy to care. Anyway, the princess was ruining her body. Then, there were strange rumors in the princess's residence. They said that the princess was so sad that she went crazy. She didn't leave the house all day and ate a lot. They said that Princess Jiehui had become a big fatty. Even Li Wen in the palace heard the news. He summoned Ningxu to the palace. When he saw that Ningxu didn't become a big fatty, he actually let out a long sigh of relief. Ningxu didn't care about these rumors. Seeing Li Wen looking at him without speaking, Ningxu's heart beat wildly. He asked, "Brother, do you have any orders for me?" Li Wen said indifferently, "How is your stay in the princess's residence?" "Very good. The princess's residence has a beautiful environment. It's suitable for retirement," Ningxu said with some flattery. "I heard that you eat a lot now?" Li Wen's tone was indifferent. He looked at Ningxu up and down. "Overeating is not good for your body. Or are you still unable to forget Duan Xinghui?" Ningxu quickly waved his hand. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to express his intentions. He was afraid that Li Wen would misunderstand that he was still interested in Duan Xinghui. "Brother, I recently obtained a peerless martial art. I'm practicing martial arts. People who practice martial arts eat a lot." Li Wen's face revealed a surprised expression. This was the first time Ningxu saw Li Wen's face reveal such an expression. "As long as you're happy," Li Wen said indifferently. Obviously, he didn't believe that Ningxu was practicing some peerless martial art. "It's true, Imperial Brother. Chun Mei really obtained a peerless martial art." Ningxu quickly took out the secret martial art book and placed it in front of Li Wen. Li Wen lowered his head and looked at the words peerless martial arts. His eyes stared blankly. Ningxu said, "You can keep this kind of thing. Imperial Brother, why don't you practice it too? This thing is really useful. It can strengthen your body and prolong your life." Ningxu strongly recommended to Li Wen.
Ding.
"The player's secret book has been exchanged. You are not qualified to give it to others?" The system's cold mechanical voice suddenly appeared. Ningxu was shocked. This secret manual was no longer hers. Damn, Ningxu could only grin at Li Wen and say, "Imperial Brother, this secret manual is probably still dangerous. Let Chen Mei practice it first. If there is any danger, Chen Mei will bear it." Li Wen looked at Ningxu with a smile that wasn't a smile and waved his hand at her. Ningxu eagerly left the palace. Ningxu fell into a frenzied practice mode. Everything else was pushed back. The current Ningxu was no longer the big eater, but her body had entered a strange process. Now, Ningxu's body was circulating a weak aura. This aura had a warm feeling. It wandered in her body and strengthened her body. Ningxu felt that her body was filled with vigorous strength. Even her mind was unprecedentedly clear. Her mind was clear. She felt that the whole world was unprecedentedly bright. What a magical feeling. Ningxu touched her arm. Although the flesh was still smooth and delicate, it was full of strength. Fortunately, it wasn't muscle. Ningxu, who had achieved great success, was in high spirits. Then, she brought a group of guards to the Imperial Manor, which was the original owner's manor. The Imperial Manor was very big. There were a lot of orchards, land, and all kinds of plants. Ningxu had already thought about it. Food, clothing, housing, and transportation. The word eat was placed at the top. He didn't know if this world had high-yield crops like sweet potatoes and potatoes. Moreover, they were very resistant to hunger. If there was a natural disaster, they could save lives. Ningxu looked around the entire manor. He was very disappointed that he didn't see any of these things. He found the manor's steward and asked him. The steward also said that there was no such thing. This is not scientific. There were traces of sweet potatoes in human history for 2,000 years. This world actually didn't have any sweet potatoes. Could it be that the people of this world hadn't discovered these things that could satisfy hunger? Ning Shu thought. She was obviously a little princess, but she had to farm. It felt like she was working hard. Ning Shu went into the forest alone to look for wild sweet potatoes and potatoes. The manor's forest was very gloomy and cold. After years of accumulation, a thick layer of leaves fell on the ground. There were also ants and insects crawling on it. Ning Shu used a branch to push aside the thorns and grass. At the same time, she carefully looked for sweet potato vines. The deeper she went into the mountains, the more dense the trees were. Moreover, they were very thick. She couldn't see the sky when she raised her head. The sky was completely covered. Moreover, the forest was filled with smoke. Ning Shu was a little afraid to go forward. She reckoned that the smoke was the poisonous gas fermented by the dead branches and leaves. For the whole day, Ning Shu wandered around the forest. When she was hungry, she got a rabbit and roasted it. What made Ning Shu happy was that her skills were really getting more and more agile. When she caught a rabbit, it was really effortless. After a simple meal, Ning Shu continued to wander. She didn't find anything, but she found a few small red wild peppers. She carefully dug one out. There was still soil on the roots. Ning Shu took the peppers back and personally planted them in the courtyard. Yuan Dong watched from the side and said anxiously, "Princess, put it down. Let this servant do it." In fact, Ning Shu didn't know much about farming. But in any case, she had lived in the era of the internet. Moreover, there were so many stewards and tenant farmers in the manor who knew how to farm. The next day, Ning Shu continued to wander deep in the forest. She didn't have much hope in her heart, but she was unwilling to give up. Why couldn't she see any wild sweet potatoes? This didn't make sense. After wandering for a long time, Ning Shu still couldn't find any. She took out some dry food and sat on a branch to eat. Sitting on the branch, she looked into the distance. Around her was a sea of trees, shrouded in white smoke. It felt very mysterious. Ning Shu was lost in thought. Suddenly, she felt a pain in her hand. Looking down, 2 small reds appeared on her fingers. Moreover, the dry food in her hand was gone. It was gone. Fuck. Ning Shu's heart skipped a beat. What had bitten her? And she didn't even see what it was. Ning Shu hurriedly squeezed her fingers. She didn't know if there was poison. After squeezing for a while, the blood was bright red. There were no signs of poison. Damn, this place is too dangerous. I have to leave quickly. Perhaps the sweet potatoes in this world have been censored. Chapter 42. Ning Shu did not know what had bitten her. For a moment, she was afraid of this forest. She quickly shuttled through the forest, wanting to return to the manor. Ning Shu was somewhat uneasy. She clearly felt that something was watching her. Moreover, the gaze followed her like a shadow. Ning Shu had goosebumps all over her body. Fuck, could it be a ghost? Seeing a ghost in broad daylight? Or was it some kind of beast? Ning Shu turned her head and looked around. She did not see anything. She only heard the sound of birds in the forest. It was very mournful, making the whole forest seem a bit gloomy. Oh my god, it was too scary. Ning Shu ran all the way, but she could not get rid of that strange feeling. She did not know how long she had been running. Ning Shu was so tired that she could not straighten her arms. However, the hairs on her body were still standing. Ning Shu was incomparably annoyed. What was going on? If you have the ability, then show yourself. Why are you hiding? Even if you want to die, you have to let people die, a painful death. Ning Shu simply sat on a tree branch and looked around. She did not see anything. What the hell was this? Fuck, did she really encounter a ghost? Ning Shu thought about what had bitten her before. There were 2 small teeth holes on her fingers. Her food was stolen. Could it be that something had stolen her food? Ning Shu silently took out a piece of chestnut cake from the bag. She concentrated on looking around to see if there was anything around her. Her nerves were very tense. Ning Shu only heard the sound of the grass rustling. Then, a gray shadow quickly rushed towards her. It was very fast. Ning Shu did not even see what it was. Then, the pastry in her hand was gone. Ning Shu rubbed her eyes and looked at her empty palm. She turned it over and over again. It was really gone. What the hell was it? Its speed was too fast. Ning Shu only saw an afterimage. However, since it wanted to eat, it should not be a ghost. However, Ning Shu's heart was still filled with vigilance. Moreover, this little thing was so fast that it would be too easy to hurt her. Ning Shu felt that he had mastered a peerless martial art, and his speed was quite fast. But now, in front of this unknown thing, he was nothing but trash. Ning Shu felt that his self-esteem had been hurt. She had to retreat quickly. Since the people's livelihood plan was not going to work, she would take another path. Anyway, she had military strength now, so she might as well go to war. Ning Shu ran as fast as he could while thinking. But your sister, when the hell are you going to follow me? Ning Shu's heart was like a grass-mud horse, and this time, his gaze on her was much more fervent, and she kept following him. Without a second thought, Ning Shu untied the bag of dried food from his waist and threw it behind him. Then, Ning Shu heard a squeaking sound. It sounded a little like a mouse and a little like a fox. Anyway, he couldn't figure out what it was. Ning Shu stepped on the trunk and climbed up the tree. Lying on the branch, he looked at the bag of dried food. He saw a furry, gray thing that was only the size of a fist crawling towards the bag of dried food. It was a man's fist-sized fur ball, and he couldn't see its eyes or nose. This little thing crawled into the bag of dried food, and probably didn't know how to get out. With a few slashing sounds, it tore the bag into pieces. Ning Shu's hair stood on end when she saw this. These claws were too powerful. She must have grown hair on her guts just now to put the snacks in her hand to seduce it. She was really grateful that it showed mercy to her hand. The dried food was quickly eaten by the little thing. It was obviously such a small thing, but it could eat so much. It seemed that it was some kind of strange creature. Ning Shu didn't even think about it, and quickly wanted to escape. This little thing was obviously not to be trifled with. Ning Shu was just about to run when she saw that the little thing was actually looking at her. Moreover, it stood upright. It still looked like a furry ball. Ning Shu expressed that she really liked furry things, but this little thing was not a stuffed toy. You don't have to follow me anymore. I've already given you everything I have. Ning Shu jumped down from the tree and felt all over her body to show that she wasn't lying. The little gray ball squeaked twice, and then in the blink of an eye, it was in front of Ning Shu. It straightened its body and revealed its sharp claws. It was only the size of a man's fist. In fact, its claws were also very small, but the claws were very dark and exuded a kind of black luster. Ning Shu was so scared that she was sweating. Her face spasmed as she smiled at the little thing. I really don't have anything. The little gray ball's small black bean-like eyes looked at Ning Shu. Its black eyes were shining. Ning Shu was speechless. What was the situation now? She was trapped by an unknown thing. Help! Ning Shu and the little thing looked at each other. The little gray ball squeaked twice at Ning Shu. Ning Shu, I really don't understand what you're trying to say, dear. Ning Shu thought for a moment. Seeing that the little thing liked pastries, she said, How about you let me go? I'll go get you some pastries. Ning Shu felt like she was going crazy. She was trying to bargain with an animal. It was simply ridiculous. The little gray ball looked at Ning Shu. Then, slowly, it grabbed Ning Shu's skirt and slowly climbed up until it reached Ning Shu's shoulder. Then, as if it was tired, it sat down on Ning Shu's shoulder. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes and turned to look at the little thing. Did it want to go with him? Sigh, I'll just treat it as a pet. Ning Shu quickly ran back to the manor. Oh my god, his heart still couldn't calm down. Back at the manor, Ning Shu immediately asked Yuan Dong to bring over all kinds of pastries for the little gray ball to eat to its heart's content. Yuan was surprised when she saw the little gray ball. Then, she saw that the little gray ball ate the pastries very quickly. In a short while, several plates of pastries were gone. Yuan's jaw dropped to the ground. She couldn't help but ask, "Princess, what is this thing?" She didn't know what the hell it was either. Ningxu sighed. She hadn't found any wild sweet potatoes, but she had found a glutton that didn't know what kind of species the little gray ball was. Oh my god, why was it so difficult for her to win over Emperor Li Wen? Ningxu looked bitterly at the little gray ball that couldn't move on the table. It must have eaten too much. Ningxu still didn't want to give up. He would wander around for another day tomorrow. If he couldn't find anything, then so be it. Perhaps the soil here wasn't suitable for potatoes to grow. But how was he going to deal with this little thing? Should he throw it out now that it couldn't move after eating too much? Squeak, 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 squeak. The little gray ball on the table squeaked. Ningxu was surprised. This little guy was quite sensitive to people. Ningxu smiled and gave the little gray ball to Li Wen. Chapter 43. Since then, this unknown creature had become a frequent visitor to the manor. After eating, it would run away. When it wanted to eat, it would jump on the table and squeak. Ningxu guessed that this thing was a mutated rat. Looking at this thing, she felt that it was enough. It made her feel as if her balls were about to burst. Such a small thing actually ate so much. Unable to raise this little thing, Ningxu went to the jungle to wander. If he still couldn't find it, he would have to go back home. Calculating the time, Duan Xinghui and Area should be back. There was a mission to deal with this, Ningxu sighed. Ningxu used a branch to push aside the thorns and grass and carefully searched. It was reasonable to say that things like sweet potatoes liked shade. Such a jungle should be the environment that sweet potatoes liked. Squeak, 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 squeak. The gray fur ball kept squeaking beside Ningxu. Ningxu bent down to look carefully and said to the gray fur ball, "You are a native. Do you know that there is a thing called sweet potatoes?" Squeak. Not squeak, it's called sweet potatoes. Just when Ningxu was about to give up, he finally saw a plant similar to the leaves of a sweet potato. Ningxu carefully threw out the roots, and on the roots was a sweet potato the size of a carrot. The skin was bright red. Although it was not very big, Ningxu was very excited, as if he could see that the mission was completed, and he was about to leave this world. In fact, Ningxu still enjoyed this different life. But the longer he stayed in this world, the more his soul power would be consumed, and in the end, his soul would dissipate. Ningxu put the sweet potato in his pocket and used a branch to push it around. Since he found one, there should be others around. Sure enough, he found a lot of sweet potatoes scattered around. Ningxu did not think of digging these things out and only took some back to experiment. Squeak, squeak. The little gray ball followed Ningxu out of the forest. After returning to the manor, Ningxu immediately found the manor's steward and tenant farmers to open up a plot of land for experiments. Plants like sweet potatoes reproduce asexually. Even if the vines were cut with scissors and then planted in the soil, they could still survive. The premise was that the soil had to be soft. Ningxu told the tenant farmer what little knowledge he had while he watched from the side. After the matter of the sweet potatoes was settled, Ningxu stayed in the manor for a few days. Seeing that the sweet potatoes didn't show any signs of withering, he repeatedly reminded the steward to take good care of the land. Ningxu was still a little worried in his heart. He directly used Li Wen's name and said, "This thing is what the emperor wants. You have to take good care of it. If you take good care of it, you will be rewarded." Hearing that it was for the emperor, the steward's face became much more solemn. Then Ningxu brought a group of honor guards. What made Ningxu more speechless was that the little gray ball actually followed him. Ningxu didn't think that this little thing followed him because it liked him. It was completely because of the pastries. If it followed him, then so be it. It was just like a pet that could eat a lot. Ningxu brought a group of people to the princess's mansion. When Ningxu just arrived at the city gate, he met an army. The two sides were crowded at the city gate. The army had an awe-inspiring aura, suppressing the momentum of Ningxu's side. "Princess, princess, it's General Duan. It's General Duan." Yuan Dong saw the person at the front of the army and hurriedly shouted to Ning Shu, who was sitting in a gorgeous carriage. She looked very surprised, and even her eyes were red. Ning Shu's expression was indifferent. Sure enough, enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Ning Shu looked outside and met Duan Xinghui's eyes. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes and looked at Duan Xinghui, who was wearing armor. His eyes were bright, darker than the original owner's memories. The most ridiculous thing was that he had a woman in his arms. When marching to war, he actually rode with a woman on a horse. It was said that Duan Xinghui handled matters calmly, but Ning Shu didn't seem to be. Ning Shu sized up Arya, who was riding with Duan Xinghui. Arya had a healthy, weak complexion. Compared to the Great Yong Court's noble women's beauty standards, Arya couldn't be considered a beauty. Because of her complexion, her facial features lost some of their color. Any young lady from the capital's boudoir was prettier than Arya. No wonder the original owner of the body was unwilling to accept this. Although she was a country girl, she was a noble princess. Losing to such a girl was too frustrating. Duan Xinghui and Ning Shu's eyes met. Her gaze was incomparably cold. Duan Xinghui was the first to look away. Squeezing the horse's belly, he pulled on the reins and headed towards the sedan chair. Duan Xinghui cupped his hands and saluted Ning Shu. This general kowtows in salute to the princess. I wish the princess good health. Ning Shu sized up Duan Xinghui. And he wasn't missing an arm or a leg. His face was a bit thinner. Ning Shu nodded. General Duan has returned. General Duan, you can go ahead and enter the palace to meet the emperor. Ning Shu's attitude towards Duan Xinghui was very cold and polite, carrying the arrogance of a member of the imperial family. Duan Xinghui's expression changed. He was depressed by Ning Shu's attitude. He had even thought of how to face the princess's questioning and quarreling, but the other party's attitude made all the various solutions he thought of along the way unable to be put to use. Now the other party didn't care about him at all. Duan Xinghui felt that his self-esteem was hurt. Duan Xinghui was a person with strong self-esteem. He was worshipped and admired wholeheartedly by Arya. But in front of Princess Jiahui, the difference between the monarch and the minister was always between them. Ning Shu just glanced at Arya. From a distance, Arya was not beautiful. She was a little dark. Looking closely, she was really dark. On the contrary, her almond-shaped eyes were very outstanding. Well, Duan Xinghui probably saw the beauty of Arya's soul. General Duan, aren't you going to enter the city? Ning Shu said to Duan Xinghui coldly. Facing the indifferent Princess Jiahui, Duan Xinghui felt uneasy in his heart. If it was a princess who made a fuss or even scolded him, Duan Xinghui would know. Such a Princess Jiahui really made people uneasy. She faced him as if he was a stranger. She didn't feel happy because he was alive. Such a princess posture really made Duan Xinghui unable to spit out a breath in his heart. He felt bad all over. Arya, who was in Duan Xinghui's arms, looked at Ning Shu curiously. Looking at the graceful and noble princess, her momentum made Arya feel a little inferior in her heart. And she was so beautiful. Arya couldn't find words to describe her beauty. She only felt that she was sitting in the gorgeous gilded carriage, which complemented the luxurious carriage. She was like a fairy who came down to earth. People didn't dare to look directly at her. Ning Shu saw Arya looking at him without any scruples. Her eyes were filled with amazement and a sense of inferiority. She was nervous. Her rough hands grasped the saddle tightly.
How dare you? Who are you?
How dare you look directly at the royal family? Before Ning Shu could say anything, Yuan Dong shouted at her with a sharp tone. Yuan Dong's pretty face was full of dignity and vigor. After all, she was the princess's personal maidservant, so she had some vigor to her. Chapter 44. Yuan Dong pointed at Arya with a serious and dignified face. Why don't you salute the princess? Arya's black and red face showed embarrassment. She was stunned for a moment on the horse's back. Duan Xinghui's face flashed with annoyance when his beloved was embarrassed. He tightly pursed his lips and saluted Ningxu. Your Highness, Arya is from the countryside and doesn't know etiquette. Your Highness, please be magnanimous. Damn, if she was not magnanimous, she would not be magnanimous? This was completely moral kidnapping. Ningxu's face was cold, which made her momentum even stronger. Ningxu said lightly, General, you'd better go to the palace to meet the Emperor. Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. Duan Xinghui saluted and held Arya in his arms. Duan Xinghui had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. With a cold face, he looked very steady and reliable. If there was a beauty in his arms, it would be a beautiful picture of a hero and a beauty. However, Arya was a little far from the beauty. When she stood with Duan Xinghui, there was a feeling of disharmony. Your Highness, how can you tolerate the rudeness of this lowly person? Yuan Dong said angrily to Ningxu. Ningxu touched the small gray ball's fluffy body. Seeing Yuan Dong, who was very excited, her face was full of jealousy. Yuan Dong, pay attention to your identity, Ningxu said lightly. Yuan Dong's heart suddenly stopped, and she couldn't speak. She glanced at Arya with the corner of her eyes. Your Highness, what's in your arms? Arya asked in surprise when she saw the small gray ball in Ningxu's hand. Ningxu suddenly laughed. She could see what kind of character Arya was. Some country people were simple and unsophisticated, but also had a kind of humility of a nobody. It turned out that Duan Xinghui liked girls with such characters. The original owner and Arya's characters were two extremes. Princess Jiahui was as proud as a phoenix soaring in the sky. There was no such thing as humility in her character. It could only be said that Princess Jiahui was not Duan Xinghui's cup of tea at all. He only hoped that after seeing the prosperous capital, Arya could still keep her simple character and was still the cinnabar mole in Duan Xinghui's heart. Arya's black and red face showed embarrassment, and she didn't speak. The princess just smiled. Arya looked at Ningxu's smile, and her sharp and somewhat inferior heart felt that the princess was laughing at her. After saving the dying Duan Xinghui, she unknowingly fell in love with this handsome and indifferent man. He had a noble air about him. Such a person was not simple at first glance. Ever since she learned of Duan Xinghui's identity, Arya had both expected and not expected that he was actually a general of the Great Yong dynasty. Looking at the neat troops coming to pick up Duan Xinghui, the flags were fluttering. In the small courtyard of the farmhouse, Arya was overwhelmed with emotions. She looked at Duan Xinghui in a daze, only feeling that the taller Duan Xinghui was, the more humble she seemed. She just didn't expect that Duan Xinghui was willing to take her away. Arya loved Duan Xinghui deeply. For Duan Xinghui, she left her family, her hometown, and stepped into the unknown capital. It was just that she had met the princess before entering the capital. If the princess was a peony flower, Arya felt that she was a weed, the difference between the clouds and the mud. Arya looked at the gorgeous, rainbow-colored glass canopy and jade-green draped carriage. Silk curtains hung around the carriage, and gilded bells hung from the four corners, making crisp sounds with the breeze. Inside the carriage, there was a fragrant incense, making one feel like they were in a fairyland. Arya's heart was filled with longing and a trace of jealousy. The two troops didn't speak, and the atmosphere was very oppressive. Only the fluttering of the war flags and the crisp ringing of the bells could be heard. Princess, this general will take his leave. Duan Xinghui pulled on the reins. Ningxu said. Ningxu only grunted in acknowledgement, not even raising his head. He stroked the small gray ball in his hand. Duan Xinghui had asked for a snub, and so he left. From beginning to end, Ningxu didn't look at Duan Xinghui. Yuan Dong next to him looked very bad. Looking at Ningxu, he wanted to say something but didn't dare to. Until Duan Xinghui's troops entered the city, Yuan Dong couldn't help but ask, Princess, who is the woman in General Duan's arms? How can General Duan treat you like this? Yuan Dong defended Ningxu. How can General Duan allow a woman to march in the army? Ningxu didn't speak. She was thinking about what to do next since the main character was back. How to retaliate against Duan Xinghui and Arya, by separating them alive. Forget it. People were rebellious. The more they were stopped, the more they had to do it. Ningxu frowned and looked a little impatient. The moment she saw Duan Xinghui, all kinds of complicated emotions surged in her heart. Resentment, hatred, love, and hate were intertwined. When she saw Arya, jealousy and hatred gushed out of her heart. She couldn't wait to tear Arya's face. She felt drunk. The emotions of the original owner were so strong that she couldn't suppress them. Forget it. Pleasing the big boss Li Wen was the most important thing. She felt that the most important thing in this task was not to marry. Soon after Ningxu returned to the princess mansion, she received a decree from Li Wen, asking her to go to the palace quickly. Ningxu packed up and went to the palace. Every time she saw Li Wen, Ningxu had to prepare herself mentally. She was really uneasy when she saw Li Wen's expressionless face. Walking into the imperial study, Ningxu saluted Li Wen. "Greetings, brother." Li Wen put down the cinnabar pen and glanced at Ningxu. After a while, she said, "Duan Xinghui is back." "Well, I saw him at the city gate," Ningxu said lightly. Li Wen's sharp eyes scanned Ningxu's face. Then she said, "I found out a few days ago that Duan Xinghui was still alive. I sent someone to bring him back. I wanted to tell you, but you weren't in the princess mansion." Ningxu raised his eyebrows. He walked over and patted Li Wen's shoulder. "Brother, I'm not talking about you. This Duan Xinghui is just a defeated general. Why did you send someone to bring him back and let him come back so gloriously?" Li Wen glanced at the claw on her shoulder. Ningxu immediately retracted his hand. She lowered her head and said, "I've overstepped. If you still want to continue your relationship with Duan Xinghui?" Li Wen looked at Ningxu indifferently. "I can give an edict." "No, there's no need at all." Ningxu waved his hand and said, "Brother, you must not associate me with Duan Xinghui. Moreover, Duan Xinghui already has a woman by his side." Li Wen's starry eyes flashed. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth.
"You are my sister," he said.
"You are a noble princess of Great Yong. Why must you cling on to Duan Xinghui? Moreover, he is someone who was defeated on his first expedition." Ningxu, pfft, so this was how Li Wen thought of Duan Xinghui. In the plot, Princess Jiehui had competed with a village girl for Duan Xinghui. Furthermore, Duan Xinghui was the defeated general in Li Wen's heart. This was simply trampling Li Wen's face to the ground. Chapter 45. It seemed that following Li Wen and not having anything to do with Duan Xinghui was the correct path. It was simply awesome. Ningxu bowed to Li Wen and said firmly, "My sister no longer has any thoughts about Duan Xinghui and will not have anything to do with him. I will not disgrace the dignity of the royal family." Li Wen looked at Ningxu carefully and nodded. "It's good that you understand. From the looks of it, Duan Xinghui is not a good person. He brought a woman along on the march and did not take the military rules to heart." Ningxu agreed. "Brother, you're right."
"You're very right."
Li Wen curled her lips and said, "You can go back." When Ningxu bowed and excused herself, a small gray ball jumped out from her collar and rushed towards Li Wen at lightning speed. Ningxu was so scared that she almost peed her pants. This guy's claws were very sharp. If Li Wen was hurt, even if she had 10 lives, it wouldn't be enough to pay for it. There was no need for her to go through the marriage. She would have to apologize with her death. "Brother, dodge away," Ningxu and Li Wen shouted. However, the scene in front of them made Ningxu feel as if a piece of cotton was stuck in his throat and his heart was stuffed. He saw the small gray ball rubbing against Li Wen's face very intimately, its claws hugging Li Wen's ear. Ningxu felt even more stifled. She had provided this fellow with good food and drinks, but when he saw Li Wen, he forgot everything. Ningxu even thought that she had taken in a powerful pet with her tiger body trembling and the aura of a tyrant. She was still a fucking cannon fodder. This kind of thing had nothing to do with her. Ningxu's eyes were filled with melancholy as he looked at the small gray ball. Li Wen's face was full of surprise. She grabbed the little thing off her face and placed it in her palm to take a look. A pair of small black bean-like eyes looked at Li Wen with watery eyes that emitted a bright light. "What is this?" Li Wen placed the small gray ball on the table and asked indifferently. Ning Shu curled his lips and said, "This is a little thing that my sister found in the manor. I don't know what it is either. It just eats a lot and likes to eat pastries." "Oh." Li Wen raised her eyebrows and took a piece of pastry for the small gray ball. The small gray ball held the pastry and ate it. It looked charmingly naive and very cute. "All right, let's go back." Li Wen watched the small gray ball eat the pastry and said to Ning Shu. Ning Shu nodded and walked forward, ready to grab the little gray ball and run away. Squeak, squeak. The little gray ball jumped onto Li Wen's shoulder and squeaked at Li Wen while tightly clutching Li Wen's collar. Ning Shu. Fuck, she had so many pastries, but they couldn't even compare to Li Wen's pastries. Fuck, why was there such a big difference between people? Imperial brother, since the small gray ball likes you, please take care of it. Ning Shu smiled embarrassedly. Imperial brother is tired from reviewing the memorials. You can play with this thing. Just treat it as a gift from your sister. Then, thank you very much. Li Wen's mouth hooked up. No problem, no problem. Ning Shu and Li Wen grinned. They felt uncomfortable. They glared at the small gray ball and then left the imperial study. Just as they left the imperial study, a palace maid immediately came over. Ning Shu bowed. This servant greets the princess. The empress invites the princess to the palace. Ning Shu thought about it and still went. If she didn't go, with the empress's careful mind, she would definitely hate her. Since she left the palace to live in the princess's residence, she had already offended the empress. When they arrived at the empress's palace, Ning Shu looked at the empress, who was smiling amiably. Ning Shu felt that this empress was quite tough. She was responsible for managing the harem. She was tolerant and magnanimous. Sometimes she had to take on multiple roles. She was an abortion expert and the head of the family planning department. After not seeing her for a while, the empress's face had fatigue that couldn't be concealed. It seemed that the situation in the palace had exhausted the empress. Ning Shu felt that the empress had eaten too much. She was the empress and could be high and mighty. Why did she have to participate in the struggle between the concubines? To put it bluntly, she was too controlling. She had to hold everything in the palm of her hand. It was really tiring. Hearing that the empress wanted her to return to the palace, her expression and tone were very sincere. However, Ning Shu only said a few perfunctory words and didn't say that she wanted to return to the palace. This made the empress's face change. Coming out of the empress's palace, she coincidentally met many concubines. Ning Shu felt drunk. She actually enjoyed the treatment of Li Wen. These concubines just wanted to know if she was going to return to the palace and when she was going to return. Ning Shu was very tired dealing with so many people. She pretended to be very proud and had an expression that said, "Don't talk to me, you dregs." She went all the way back to the princess's residence. Not long after, Ning Shu found out that Li Wen had issued an edict to remove Duan Xinghui from his position as a third-rank general. So now, Duan Xinghui was a nobody. He didn't have any official position. This news was brought by Yuan Dong. Yuan Dong was very concerned about the general's residence. When she learned that Duan Xinghui had been removed from his position, she hurriedly came to tell Ning Shu. She wanted to let Ning Shu plead with the emperor. Ning Shu felt very happy. When she saw Yuan Dong's anxious face, she sneered in her heart and said, "Why do you pay so much attention to the Duan mansion?" Yuan Dong's eyes flashed and she said, "Princess, I'm doing this for you. General Duan is your future husband." Ning Shu's eyes sharpened and she said in a cold voice, "Yuan Dong, pay attention to your identity. When did Duan Xinghui become my husband? You have ruined my reputation. I can't keep you." Yuan Dong knelt in front of Ning Shu with a flop. Her face was pale, and she said, "I overstepped. Please forgive me, princess." But she didn't dare to say that Duan Xinghui was the princess's future husband. On the other side, Arya followed Duan Xinghui back to the Duan mansion. The Duan mansion was very big. It was richly decorated. Arya felt that her eyes were not enough. Madame Duan, Duan Xinghui's mother, had not recovered from the joy of her dead son coming back to life. When she heard Duan Xinghui say that Arya would be his wife in the future, Madame Duan almost fainted. Looking at Arya, who was wearing cotton clothes and had a dark face and no manners at all, Madame Duan was about to break down. It was not easy for her to raise her son after losing her husband, and he might become the emperor's brother-in-law. Her future was very smooth. Where did this little girl come from? Madame Duan was a scheming woman. Although she wanted to bury Arya alive in her heart, she still had a gentle smile on her face. Seeing the smile on his mother's face, Duan Xinghui's serious face also showed a smile. He said to Madame Duan, "Mother, Arya is a very good girl. She is simple and lovely. She will be filial to you." Madame Duan's face trembled, and the gentle smile on her face almost disappeared. Simple and lovely? Madame Duan looked at Arya, who had a dark face. She looked older than Duan Xinghui. Madame Duan's heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys had suffered indelible damage. Was her son blind? Chapter 46. Especially when she knew that Duan Xinghui and Arya had been intimate, Madame Duan covered her head and wanted to faint. She was even more displeased with Arya. She was a woman who had no self-respect and self-love. She was even worse than a prostitute in a brothel. Madame Duan was a decisive woman. No matter how much she hated Arya in her heart, she still arranged Arya properly and sent 2 maids to serve Arya. The 2 maids looked better than Arya. Arya was very embarrassed and not used to it. She looked at Duan Xinghui for help. Duan Xinghui was very satisfied with his mother's arrangement. In his opinion, his mother had accepted Arya. He was really happy and couldn't help smiling on his serious face. When Mrs. Duan saw Duan Xinghui beaming with joy, the blue veins on her forehead throbbed, but she held it in. She would have to rely on Duan Xinghui for the rest of her life. When she married, she would follow her husband, and when her husband died, she would follow her son. Duan Xinghui had to maintain a gentle and kind appearance in front of his son. He could not alienate his son because of a country girl. Madame Duan thought that there was no need to strain their relationship for such a woman and hurt their mother-son relationship. But after a while, an imperial edict came from the palace. Duan Xinghui was removed from the position of general. Hearing the news, Madame Duan was angry and anxious. Anger, fear, and all kinds of emotions were intertwined, which made Madame Duan faint. That bitch was a jinx. Before she fainted, Madame Duan completely forgot that Arya saved her son. The son she had taught for so many years was ruined. Duan Xinghui took the imperial edict and looked a little pale. He pursed his lips. The eunuch who announced the imperial edict was waiting for the money for tea. However, the 2 masters of the Duan mansion, one fainted and the other looked pale. They didn't mean to pay at all. The eunuch who announced the imperial edict snorted coldly. Who did he think he was? He thought he was the future emperor's son-in-law. Now he was just a nobody. Why did he show off? Especially the one who was disliked by the emperor. He was just a general with a greasy hair and a powdered face. Arya was trembling beside her. Everything that happened made her feel at a loss. She felt as if she had broken into the world of giants. She didn't even understand what the imperial edict said. She only saw Madame Duan faint, and Duan Xinghui's expression was ugly. What happened? Arya asked. She really felt that she was out of the loop and didn't understand anything. Duan Xinghui was now mentally and physically exhausted. Previously, when the emperor sent someone to pick him up, he thought that the emperor valued him and took a fancy to his ability. Now, he had taken away his position. Could it be related to Princess Jiahui? When he met Princess Jiahui at the city gate, she didn't say anything at that time. Her expression was very cold. She didn't say anything about his return, but afterwards, she took revenge. What was even more unacceptable to Duan Xinghui was that he thought he was really capable, but the emperor's appreciation of him was based on Princess Jiahui. Without Princess Jiahui, he would have been directly sent to hell. Duan Xinghui pursed his lips tightly, and his face turned black and white. He didn't hear what Arya was saying at all. Arya was in a new environment, and the only thing she could rely on was Duan Xinghui. But Duan Xinghui ignored her now. Arya was under a lot of pressure, worried about gains and losses, and became impatient. Duan Lang. Arya's voice trembled. Only then did Duan Xinghui react. Seeing the panic and uneasiness on Arya's face, his heart softened and he said, "It's okay." But Arya's heart didn't relax. Her heart was full of uneasiness. This was a completely different environment from the one she used to live in. Here, she only had Duan Xinghui. She could only hold on to Duan Xinghui tightly. Arya stayed in the Duan manor, like this. She was neither master nor servant. Their relationship was very awkward. Madame Duan, who had fainted, woke up and drank 2 bowls of frozen lotus seed porridge to suppress the anger in her heart. She quickly said, "Let's go to the princess manor." The princess manor. Ning Shu didn't know what happened in the Duan manor. Now she was practicing the whip technique and had mastered the peerless martial arts. Ning Shu had been looking for a suitable weapon for herself. It was impossible to have strength without a suitable weapon. Ning Shu finally chose the whip. The whip was particular about flexibility, and its lethality was quite good. Ning Shu held a jet-black whip in her hand, which emitted a cold luster. When she waved the whip, the light from the whip flickered and produced a sharp whistling sound. Ning Shu turned her body, and in the end, the whip fiercely hit the rockery, leaving a deep ravine. Ning Shu put away the whip and felt very satisfied. This whip was given by Li Wen. It was said that it was made of legendary cold iron and was covered with barbs. When it hit a person's body, it could bring out a piece of flesh. It was quite ferocious. It was indeed a product of the royal family. "Princess, Madame Duan is here to visit Princess." Yuan Dong bowed to Ning Shu. Ning Shu raised her eyebrows and suddenly laughed. She hung the whip on her waist and asked indifferently, "How long have you been here?" Yuan Dong respectfully said, replying to Princess, "She has been waiting for almost 2 hours." After waiting for almost 2 hours, it seemed like something really happened. Ning Shu wiped her sweat and was very interested to see Madame Duan. Ning Shu walked into the hall and saw Madame Duan sitting on a chair. Madame Duan was wearing a blue cloud-patterned peacock embroidered robe. Her hair was covered in pearls and jade, and she had maintained her appearance well. She had the grace of a noble lady. Madame Duan's brows were filled with impatience and resentment. When she saw Ning Shu, she quickly stood up. Ning Shu bowed. "This subject greets Princess." Ning Shu didn't immediately ask Madame Duan to stand up. Instead, she walked around her and sat on a chair. She took a sip of tea and said indifferently, "Stand up. What business do you have with Ben Gong?" Madame Duan's heart was stifled by Ning Shu's attitude. She couldn't voice out her thoughts. Madame Duan sized up Ning Shu. She was wearing casual clothes with a whip on her waist. Her hair was tied up and her long ponytail was draped over her back. Coupled with her cold face, her eyes were as cold as the stars. If Princess Jiahui was previously a noble phoenix soaring in the 9 heavens, then Ning Shu was now a fairy from the 9 heavens, incomparably cold. Madame Duan's heart was in turmoil. Why didn't he like such an outstanding woman with status? Why did he like that village girl? Madame Duan really couldn't understand her son. This subject has specially come to visit Princess. This is the walnut pastry that this subject personally made. Madame Duan waved her hand at the maidservant behind her. The maidservant immediately brought the food box over. Yuan Dong looked at Ning Shu. Seeing that Ning Shu was expressionless, she took the food box. Ning Shu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the plot, Madame Duan didn't make any pastries, and Princess Jiahui also regarded Madame Duan as her mother-in-law and sincerely respected her. When dealing with Arya, Princess Jiahui was the one in the front. Chapter 47. The tragedy of the original Princess Jiahui was caused by many factors, and Duan Xinghui's mother definitely accounted for most of them. She didn't like Arya and thought that Arya was not worthy of her son, but she was afraid of hurting her relationship with Duan Xinghui, so she took advantage of Princess Jiehui's love for her son to deal with Arya. This made Duan Xinghui hate the princess more and more, and the pressure of public opinion from all sides shifted to Princess Jiehui. On the contrary, Madame Duan was fine, and was still a noble lady. Ning Shu pursed her lips and thought, fuck you. Why did these people regard Princess Jiehui as the vanguard? Maybe Princess Jiehui knew it, but she couldn't let go of the anger that her man was robbed by a woman in a corner, so she fought with Arya. Princess Jiehui's reputation was getting worse and worse. On the contrary, in an accident, Arya saved Madame Duke and became Madame Duke's adopted woman. Her status suddenly rose infinitely, and she became a woman worthy of the Duan family. At this time, Madame Duan welcomed Arya into the Duan family with a smile. It was perfect and beautiful. The mother and the son were filial and lived happily together. Ning Shu just wanted to say, "Get out of here." Ning Shu guessed that this was the purpose of Madame Duan's visit today. Ning Shu's face became colder. Madame Duan noticed the princess's face and felt uneasy. She even scolded Arya in her heart. She looked like that, and what means did she use to make her son lose his mind? "Your Highness." Madame Duan shed tears before speaking. She took out a handkerchief and pressed it at the corner of her eyes, saying, "Your Highness, please believe my son. That ignorant woman saved my son's life and threatened Xinghui with kindness. Because of her, Xinghui was removed from his position. Now, Xinghui doesn't listen to me. I'm just worried about Xinghui's future." Madame Duan begged bitterly, "Your Highness, Xinghui respects you very much. Can you persuade him that he shouldn't joke about his future?" Listening to Mrs. Duan's tearful complaint, Ning Shu's mouth twitched. Originally, she didn't want to get involved in the matter between Duan Xinghui and Arya, but Mrs. Duan wanted to make use of her. Madame Duan was nothing more than telling Ning Shu. She even blamed Ning Shu for joking about Duan Xinghui's future. Madame Duan felt that Duan Xinghui's official position was removed because she begged Li Wen. Ning Shu didn't intend to explain, but he couldn't stand Madame Duan's behavior. He sneered, "How dare you, a woman of the inner residence, interfere with the affairs of the court? The matter of official positions is naturally decided by His Majesty. A person who was defeated on his first expedition, does he still want Imperial Brother to treat him with respect? Not making him responsible for the soldiers who died in battle is already merciful. Leaving the barracks without permission, and he is the commander-in-chief of an army. Leaving his post without permission is a heinous crime. According to the law, he should be beheaded. Since you are so dissatisfied with Imperial Brother's decision, come to the palace with me and let Imperial Brother give you an explanation." Ning Shu's face was cold, and her body exuded an oppressive aura. She raised her eyebrows, which made Madame Duan stunned for a moment. Princess Jiehui was very respectful to her before and didn't take out the attitude of a princess. Now Ning Shu was not polite to her, and Madame Duan was terrified. She just relied on the princess's deep love for her son, but now the princess seemed very strange. Facing her, there was no warmth, only the majesty between the monarch and her minister. Madame Duan was timid in her heart. Judging from the princess's appearance, she wanted Duan Xinghui to be responsible for the defeat at the border. Did she want Duan Xinghui's life? Madame Duan looked at Ning Shu in a daze, and her pupils contracted. She really cried this time, "Your Highness, I." Under Ning Shu's penetrating gaze, Madame Duan felt as if her thoughts had been seen through. Madame Duan couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, do you really want to see Xinghui destroyed like this? What does Duan Xinghui have to do with me? A defeated general is not worthy of being associated with me. Madame Duan, I hope you don't randomly associate yourself with me and ruin my reputation." Ning Shu spoke without the slightest trace of politeness. She was a princess. Why should she care about other people's feelings? Especially since she didn't have any feelings for Duan Xinghui. Towards Duan Xinghui's mother, there was no need to talk about pleasing or respecting her. Now, She had to bring out the might of the imperial family and let these dregs see that she wasn't someone to be trifled with. Madame Duan felt as if the skin on her face had been slapped. The son she was most proud of had been spoken of in such an unbearable manner. However, she had no way of refuting because the other party was a princess of the Great Yong dynasty. Seeing Madame Duan's blood-spitting expression, Ningxu curled the corners of her mouth and snorted, expressing her disdain. She continued, I heard that General Duan. Look at my memory. Duan Xinghui is no longer a general. He is a commoner. I heard that Duan Xinghui brought a woman with him when marching. It seems that he is extremely fond of this woman. Congratulations to Madame for obtaining such an excellent daughter-in-law. As Ningxu spoke, she didn't conceal the contempt in her words at all. Madame Duan's face twitched. Looking at the aloof Ningxu, she felt like vomiting blood in her heart. Her son was so outstanding. How could a village girl be a match for him? When speaking of Duan Xinghui, Madame Duan sensed that the princess's words and expression didn't have the slightest bit of affection. Only then did Madame Duan panic. Without the princess, how could her son climb back up? Could it be that he was really going to be a commoner? Madame Duan felt as if she was about to vomit blood. She lowered her posture and pleaded, Princess, can you consider our past friendship and allow Xinghui to atone for his crimes by meritorious service? Atone for his crimes by meritorious service? The generals and soldiers on the border can't afford to be defiled by such a person. Ningxu spoke without the slightest trace of politeness. We are tired. Yuan Dong, see the guest out. Finished speaking, Ningxu lifted the curtain and left. Madame Duan's face was ashen and pale. She could only helplessly leave the princess's residence. Upon returning home, she fainted. Duan Xinghui cradled his unconscious mother. With a grave expression, he asked Madame Duan's servant girl, What happened, mother? Seeing Duan Xinghui's murderous gaze, the servant girl trembled and replied, Madame went to see the princess to plead on the general's behalf. General? What kind of general was he now? Duan Xinghui could guess that Madame Duan had gone to plead with Princess Jihui. This was simply asking to be humiliated. Moreover, Duan Xinghui didn't believe that he wouldn't be able to accomplish anything without Princess Jihui. Duan Xinghui's expression was unsightly. In his heart, he resented Princess Jihui. Pressing down on the hilt of the sword at his waist, he had a murderous look on his face. Why did Princess Jihui treat his mother like this? Duan Xinghui turned to leave, but he was stopped by a weak voice. Stop. Mother, this child is going to seek justice for you. Duan Xinghui felt that no matter how much Princess Jihui hated, she shouldn't be disrespectful to his mother. Stop right there. Are you crazy? Are you going to seek justice from the princess like this? Madame Duan was so anxious that she didn't know what to do. The current Princess Jihui wasn't the Princess Jihui of the past. She wasn't the Princess Jihui that could be coerced with love. Chapter 48. Mother, don't worry. Your son is fine. With that, he slipped away. Madame Duan lay on the bed and almost fainted. She gritted her teeth and said to the maid, Help me up. Madame Duan's body was weak. She was carried to the princess's residence. Princess, General Duan is outside asking for an audience. Ningxu quickly said when Yuan Dong's face revealed excitement. Ningxu touched the whip at her waist and narrowed her eyes at the excited and blissful Yuan Dong. Sensing the princess's gaze, Yuan Dong's heart froze. She carefully said, General Duan came to see the princess. Is the princess not happy? What's there to be happy about? Who is General Duan? He's just a general who was dismissed. You dare to call him a general? Ningxu said coldly. You look very happy. Duan Xinghui is here. Why are you so happy? Yuan Dong's face paled. She quickly said, I'm happy for the princess. Remember your identity. This consort has nothing to do with Duan Xinghui. If you continue to associate this consort with Duan Xinghui, this consort definitely won't forgive you, said Ningxu coldly. She was getting more and more comfortable with playing the role of princess. Yuan Dong's body trembled. She squatted down and tidied Ning Shu's skirt. She said, I know the princess is angry. Angry at General Duan, no. Duan Xinghui. But he brought a woman back. Princess, go see Duan Xinghui. I believe he'll explain it to the princess. Fuck, why didn't this person listen? It was all because Princess Jiahui was infatuated with Duan Xinghui. It left a deep impression. Princess, Duan Xinghui is waiting outside. Yuan Dong said again. Did they really think the princess's residence was a market? One came and left, and another came. Did these people think she was easy to bully? Did she have to go see them? At this moment, there was a commotion at the entrance of the princess's residence. Yuan Dong looked at Ning Shu and couldn't help but say, Princess, there are some words that I have to say. General Duan is clearly the princess's future husband, but he was snatched away by a woman who came out of nowhere. Is the princess really willing to accept this? Ning Shu looked at Yuan Dong coldly. In the storyline, Yuan Dong had also provoked Princess Jia Hui in the same way, making Princess Jia Hui very unhappy. What does that have to do with you? Ning Shu sneered. This consort knows that you adore Duan Xinghui, so this consort will definitely fulfill your wishes. Princess, Dong Hui's voice was broken as she collapsed on the ground. She looked at Ning Shu in shock as she tugged at Ning Shu's skirt and retorted, Princess, how could this servant have any feelings of admiration for General Duan? This servant is only thinking of Princess. What was the use of quibbling? Ning Shu didn't believe a single punctuation mark. At this time, the noise at the entrance of the princess's residence grew louder and louder, mixed with Duan Xinghui's angry roar. Ning Shu pulled out the whip from his waist and walked towards the door, cracking the whip loudly. As soon as Ning Shu came out, he saw Duan Xinghui, who was dressed in black, holding a knife in his hand, confronting the guards at the door. It seemed that he wanted to break into the princess's residence. Someone wanted to break into his house with a knife. What kind of feeling was that? Ning Shu only had one feeling, and that was to beat this guy to death. How dare you? Ning Shu shouted coldly. He swung the whip in his hand and wrapped it around the knife in Duan Xinghui's hand. He used his strength and threw the knife out, stabbing it into the wall. The knife trembled twice. After a while, the knife was no longer in his hand. Duan Xinghui was stunned for a moment as he looked at Ning Shu's cold face. She was wearing the simplest clothes, a woman's riding clothes, looking valiant and formidable. She had taken off her gorgeous clothes and pearl hairpin, and there was nothing extra on her body. He had never seen Jia Hui like this before. She was incomparably cold, looking at him with incomparably cold eyes. Duan Xinghui didn't know why, but there was an unknown loss in his heart. He was used to Jia Hui's admiring eyes, but when the things he was used to suddenly disappeared, he would still feel lost. For Duan Xinghui, it was also an extreme honor for a man to be admired by a woman of noble status like the princess. He didn't get what he deserved, which made him angry and disappointed. Greetings, princess. Even if he didn't want to, Duan Xinghui had to salute. This was what Duan Xinghui couldn't accept. He was a man, but he saluted to a woman, his future wife. His arrogant self-esteem couldn't accept it. Ning Shu sneered. Greetings, Duan Xinghui. Duan Xinghui, it was Imperial Brother who restored your general title, so you dare to call yourself a general. In the plot, Duan Xinghui was not removed from his official position by Li Wen, but now he was removed from his official position, which matched Aria's identity. Ning Shu smiled unkindly. She was Princess Jiahui, but she still had to take care of Duan Xinghui's male chauvinism. Now Duan Xinghui didn't have the identity that Aria looked up to. What would happen to this pair of true love ducks? Duan Xinghui's heart was suffocated, and he said in a low voice, I know that princess resents me, but my mother is innocent. So, now Duan Xinghui wanted to seek justice for Mrs. Duan. Ning Shu sneered and said, I didn't do anything to Mrs. Duan. Even if I did, what can you do? It was so cool to suppress people with power, especially when Duan Xinghui clenched his fists and endured his anger. He wanted to step on your most painful place. Duan Xinghui, as the male protagonist of this world, felt that the whole world should revolve around him and take himself as the center. Now being insulted by Ningxu, Duan Xinghui only had one thought in his mind. Fortunately, he didn't marry this scorpion-like woman. How dare you barge in, princess?
What do you want?
Or, do you want to harm me? When Ningxu said this, her voice was loud and clear, which made Duan Xinghui's ears turn red. Duan Xinghui suddenly raised his head and looked at Ningxu with undisguised disappointment and disgust in his eyes. Princess Jiahui, I didn't expect you to be such a person. You are so arrogant and unforgiving. You have no virtue that a woman should have. Do you know why I don't like you? You are always like this. Every move you make is bound by rules. You are rigid and lifeless. You flaunt yourself with a high status. Your birth doesn't give you the right to look down on others. Arya is different. She is bright and lively, without any pretense. She is simple and beautiful, like a breeze. Ningxu. Puff, Ningxu was choked by his own saliva. What kind of logic was this? Was it Princess Jiahui's fault that she was born well? Was it Princess Jiahui's fault because of her high status? This logic was so intoxicating. Ningxu translated the meaning of Duan Xinghui's words for a while. That was to say, your status is too high, and I can't breathe under your pressure, so I don't like you. Fuck, Ningxu gave him the middle finger. Chapter 49. Ningxu felt a throbbing pain in his heart. These were the emotions of the original Ningxu. The original Ningxu had never acted like a princess in front of Duan Xinghui. Instead, she was like a little woman in love. When facing Duan Xinghui, she relied on and adored him. Princess Jiahui already thought that she was humble enough in front of Duan Xinghui, but Duan Xinghui still despised her identity. Ningxu shook off the feeling of self-pity and sneered. Reincarnation was also a skill. If you had the ability, reincarnate as Li Wen and directly become the emperor. What kind of person was this? Ningxu made a big cross for Duan Xinghui in his heart. If I call you an idiot, do you dare to respond? Ningxu said to Duan Xinghui. Duan Xinghui clearly didn't understand what Ningxu was saying, but he vaguely sensed that it wasn't anything good. Ningxu moved the whip and sneered. Who are you to like me? You're just a defeated general. If I were you, I would have harmed so many people at the border. I wouldn't have the face to live in this world. Duan Xinghui's face trembled, looking very ferocious. His eyes were red as he looked at Ningxu. It was as if Ningxu had insulted his character. There are always unruly people who want to harm me. Ningxu casually found an excuse and swung the whip towards Duan Xinghui's face. If the whip with barbs hit Duan Xinghui's face, he wouldn't be able to keep his face. This kind of handsome face would become a thing of the past. Duan Xinghui's expression changed. He was a general after all, so he reacted quickly and directly used his arm to block in front of him. With a pop sound, the whip hit Duan Xinghui's arm. Duan Xinghui's face immediately turned pale. The strength of the whip, in addition to the barbs on the whip, had sunk into Duan Xinghui's skin. Duan Xinghui looked at Ningxu in disbelief. Ningxu sneered and withdrew the whip. Looking at it, there were still some blood and bits of flesh on it. Her whip could be considered sharpened, but she didn't expect it to hit Duan Xinghui. Princess? Duan Xinghui's lips trembled. His entire body was trembling. His face was pale, and his expression was one of shock. Clearly, he had not expected the other party to attack him so readily. Furthermore, he was merciless. Ningxu sneered with an indifferent expression. Men, arrest this person who tried to assassinate this consort. Duan Xinghui let out a muffled groan and covered his arm. Blood had already flowed out from between his fingers and dripped onto the bluestone floor. Princess, how can you be so heartless in front of me? Duan Xinghui looked at Ningxu with red eyes. She looked as if she had let Duan Xinghui down. She was really shameless. She had promised to marry him privately, but she actually questioned her heartlessness. Duan Xinghui, Is there something wrong with your brain? You tried to assassinate this consort, but you actually slandered this consort for being heartless. Calling you an idiot really isn't a lie. Fuck, these people lived in their own world. In their eyes, they could only see others wronging them, but they couldn't see the harm their actions caused to others. They were simply drunk. Madame Duan, who had hurried over, saw that her son was injured and Ningshu's whip was stained with blood. She felt that her heart was about to explode. She had never laid a finger on her beloved son, but he was still beaten by a woman. The anger in Madame Duan's heart was indescribable. She was about to question Ningshu, but when she met Ningshu's cold eyes, Madame Duan quivered and instantly sobered up. She was actually going to question a princess. Madame Duan's heart was very sullen. This kind of anger was bottled up in her heart, and there was no way to vent it. It was driving her crazy. Madame Duan resented Princess Jiehui for not being like before, and also resented Arya, who was now in the Duan residence. If it weren't for Arya, Duan Xinghui wouldn't have been dismissed from his position, and he wouldn't have angered Princess Jiehui. If it was said that Madame Duan still had a little hope for Ningshu before, she would let Ningshu marry into the Duan residence. As for the village girl who came from nowhere, she would deal with her later. Now Princess Jiehui actually beat Duan Xinghui without mercy. There was no distress or pity in her eyes. Madame Duan knew that Princess Jiehui really didn't have any hope for her son. How could this be? Madame Duan was mentally and physically exhausted. She hurriedly got down from the sedan and walked to Duan Xinghui to check his injuries. Princess, why are you so heartless? Madame Duan really cried this time, and her voice was helpless and panicked. If things went on like this, there was really no hope for Duan Xinghui to recover. The only way was to let Princess Jiehui plead with the emperor. It was really a sin. Damn it, another person said that she was heartless. Sure enough, they were mother and son. Their way of thinking was exactly the same. It was really strange. Ningshu sneered. What, heartless? Duan Xinghui, a wicked person, dared to break into the princess mansion and assassinate me. Everyone in the princess mansion can testify. Madame Duan's heart stopped. Seeing her son's pale face, Madame Duan felt helpless and panicked. After all, she was a woman of the inner residence, and she was useless in big things. Princess, please allow me to take my son for treatment. Then she asked someone to help Duan Xinghui and was ready to slip away.
Wait.
Ningshu said, Madame Duan, what are you doing?
You want to take away the assassin who tried to assassinate me.
Ningshu looked at the blood on the ground and then looked at Duan Xinghui's pale face because of blood loss. Ningshu felt great. Madame Duan's heart also became angry. Princess, you really want to kill him? Don't forget that Xinghui is your future husband. Ningshu's face turned cold, and she sneered. Madame Duan, be careful what you say. Don't ruin my reputation. Be careful that I enter the palace and ask His Majesty to make a decision. Duan Xinghui is already a nobody. I don't want to bear the crime of slandering the imperial family's reputation. Ningshu approached Duan Xinghui and Madame Duan. Madame Duan's body trembled, especially when she saw the bloody whip. Her face turned pale. Duan Xinghui covered his wound and stood in front of Madame Duan. His dark eyes met Ningshu's. Don't provoke this consort. If you anger this consort will make it so that your Duan family won't be able to stay in the capital any longer. This consort still hasn't settled the score with you for deceiving this consort. Duan Xinghui's face was pale and embarrassed. The huge contrast between Princess Jiehui and before made Duan Xinghui unable to react. Duan Xinghui was supported by Madame Duan and staggered away. Ningshu said again, wait a moment. Duan Xinghui and Madame Duan's hearts trembled at the same time. Their backs stiffened. Duan Xinghui pursed his lips and turned around to look at Ningshu. Ningshu smiled slightly. Her cold face suddenly warmed up, making Duan Xinghui stare blankly. When a cold person suddenly smiled, she seemed especially beautiful and moving. Duan Xinghui, there's a girl by my side who deeply admires you.
Ning Shu said to Duan Xinghui.
Duan Xinghui was stunned. He really didn't understand what Ning Shu wanted to do. Chapter 50. This consort's maidservant is deeply in love with you, Duan Xinghui. As the mistress, this consort really can't let down the maidservant's feelings. In any case, she is a maidservant who has served this consort for so many years. I hope that you can treat this consort's maidservant well. Ning Shu said to Ning Shu. She clearly saw that Duan Xinghui's serious mask cracked. He was stunned and seemed to be in disbelief. Even Madame Duan looked at Ning Shu strangely. Princess? Yuan Dong was really surprised and scared. She was surprised that she could follow General Duan. She was scared that the princess's attitude and her inner thoughts were known by the princess. In short, Yuan Dong's thoughts were all kinds of complicated. I won't leave you, princess. Please don't drive me away. Yuan Dong knelt in front of Ning Shu with a look of deep affection. It also depended on whether Ning Shu was willing to act with her. Ning Shu said indifferently, "You are now a member of the Duan family. In the future, you have to serve the Duan family well." Yuan Dong finally kowtowed to Ning Shu helplessly and stood next to Duan Xinghui. Princess, forgive this commoner for not being able to accept this. This commoner already has someone he truly loves in his heart. It is impossible for this commoner to accept someone else. Duan Xinghui even forgot about the wound on his arm. He bowed and cupped his fists towards Ning Shu. Ning Shu's expression was indifferent. What does it have to do with me that you have someone you love? Duan Xinghui was speechless. For some reason, Duan Xinghui found that Princess Jiehui was really difficult to communicate with now. Ning Shu turned around and returned to her residence. She did not even bother with these people. In the end, Duan Xinghui reluctantly accepted Yuan Dong and returned to the Duan mansion with Madame Duan. When they returned, Arya was waiting at the door. She was wearing brightly colored silk and satin, which made her face look even darker. The civet cat didn't look like a crown prince in the crown prince's clothes. Instead, it looked funny. Yuan Dong's eyes were full of deep contempt and contempt. When she met Arya's eyes, Arya's expression was a little embarrassed. She turned and ran into the mansion, crying as she ran. She didn't even notice the injury on Duan Xinghui's arm. The woman keenly sensed Yuan Dong's hostility towards her, as well as her vigilance and hatred towards Yuan Dong. When Duan Xinghui saw that his beloved was sad, he hurriedly chased after her. He didn't care about anything else at all. He was very reckless, just like a young boy. Star emblem, the wound, Madame Duan shouted at Duan Xinghui. The two of them were chasing each other around the Duan mansion. Madame Duan felt very annoyed. General, Yuan Dong saw Duan Xinghui run towards the village girl without thinking. Yuan Dong was shocked and also very jealous. What right did that ugly monster have? What right did she have? Without Yuan Dong by his side, Ning Shu casually promoted a maidservant from the princess residence to be by his side. In fact, Ning Shu didn't need anyone to serve him. His 3 meals a day were delivered by the kitchen. Ning Shu was either practicing martial arts or practicing martial arts. She swung her whip every day, wanting to master her whip skills to perfection. Ning Shu had a premonition that she might really have to go to the battlefield. She had to show her value to Li Wen, which was more valuable than a political marriage. Ning Shu put away the whip, took the handkerchief from the maidservant, wiped the sweat on her face and hands, and asked the little maidservant, "What's the news about the Duan mansion?" The little maidservant was called Little Hong. She was delicate and pretty. She was not very beautiful, but she was full of cleverness. When she heard Ning Shu's question, she quickly said, "Yuan Dong and Arya are now in a fierce fight. Duan Xinghui is very uncomfortable being sandwiched between 2 women," Little Hong said. Ning Shu smiled. This was the effect he wanted. Why did she have to be in front of him? Why didn't she deal with Arya in front of him? Let's see what Yuan Dong and Madame Duan would do. It was funny. Without her, a noble supporting female character who would help them achieve their unparalleled fate. Duan Xinghui and Aria's love was based on the reputation of the original owner, Princess Jihui. Now, Ning Shu will directly send Duan Dong over. You guys can go play by yourselves. Duan Xinghui had a really bad time during this period, and it was very bad. He felt very tired. Now Aria became very sensitive and clung to him more and more. Her innocent face was full of uneasiness and worry. Duan Xinghui had said many times that he would not let her down, but Aria was still uneasy. In addition, Yuan Dong was fanning the flames. Duan Xinghui had never been so tired. He felt mentally and physically exhausted. But Yuan Dong was a member of the Princess Mansion. He did not have an official position now. If he really listened to Aria and drove Yuan Dong out, Princess Jihui would make a fuss about it, and he would suffer. Seeing Duan Xinghui's attitude, Aria made a scene again. Aria was from the countryside. When she made a scene, the whole Duan mansion was alarmed. Duan Xinghui felt ashamed and helpless. Without the strong resistance of Princess Jihui, the contradiction between Duan Xinghui and Aria, and it was a class contradiction, came out. After all, Duan Xinghui was a noble child who grew up in the capital. He was really not used to such a scene. Aria was terrified. She abandoned everything and came to the capital with Duan Xinghui. Duan Xinghui was now the only life-saving straw in her life. She must hold on tightly. The more impatient Duan Xinghui was with her, the more terrified Aria was. She made a scene to prove her existence. Sometimes Duan Xinghui wondered if Aria was still the simple Aria. Duan Xinghui was heartbroken, but he still comforted Aria patiently, but he was a little tired. Madame Duan originally wanted to see Yuan Dong and Aria fight, but when she saw Aria's unruly appearance, she had to find someone to teach Aria the rules. If it went on, the Duan mansion would become the laughingstock of the whole capital. Her son didn't want the princess, and insisted on such a village girl. People outside said that Duan Xinghui's brain was full of lard. If it went on like this, Madame Duan didn't dare to go to the ancestors of the Duan family. It was a sin. Aria, who was forced to learn the rules, made a scene again. She was very unwilling to learn. She had to pay attention to eating, sleeping, and even walking. These made Aria at a loss and feel very painful. Aria grew up in the countryside. Some things were deep in her bones. It was very uncomfortable to learn the rules, as if her wings were about to be broken. The painful process could be imagined. Duan Xinghui was also very painful. In his heart, Aria was free and easy. Now, like all the women in the capital, she had to become the product of rules and education. But on one side was his beloved woman, and on the other side was his mother, who had taught him since he was a child. Duan Xinghui was too lazy to go back to the Duan mansion. He went out to drink when he had nothing to do. But after a long time, every time he went out, he had to face the strange eyes of others, which were like looking at a fool. In the face of such eyes, Duan Xinghui's heart couldn't help but waver. It was his fault to give up Princess Jihui, especially those who used to bow and scrape in front of him. Now they were arrogant in front of him. At this time, the feeling was particularly strong. Was he really wrong? Chapter 51. Duan Xinghui was firm in his thoughts. He was not wrong. He loved Aria, but why couldn't Aria be considerate of him? If a man had no career and no career that he was proud of, he would be much inferior. Now, Duan Xinghui felt a little drunk every day. He felt that his future was confused. Duan Xinghui returned to the Duan mansion with a bottle of wine and met the anxious Mrs. Duan. "Mother, what's wrong?" Duan Xinghui asked Mrs. Duan. Mrs. Duan looked at the decadent Duan Xinghui and her heart was about to break. But there was something more important. She said, "Aria went to the princess mansion to make trouble." Duan Xinghui shivered and sobered up. He threw down the wine bottle and turned to the princess mansion. He looked anxious. Even Duan Xinghui himself didn't know why he was so anxious. It was undeniable that he suddenly wanted to see Princess Jihui. There was a secret thought in his heart. He hoped that Princess Jiahui could plead with the emperor for the sake of their past friendship. When Duan Xinghui arrived at the princess mansion, he saw Arya in green kneeling in front of the princess mansion. The guards at the gate of the princess mansion were looking at Arya vigilantly. There were many people around. At this moment, for some reason, Duan Xinghui didn't even have the courage to lift his foot and walk to Arya. He only felt confused. Ning Shu heard little Hong say that Arya was making trouble at the gate. She felt bad. She stayed at home, but the people of the Duan mansion always came to make trouble. She felt drunk. Ning Shu touched the whip at her waist. When Xiao Hong saw the princess's action, she knew that the princess was angry. All the guards in the princess's residence had been drilled by the princess. They were used as targets by the princess to practice her whip skills. Ning Shu walked to the gate. She wanted to see what these people were going to do. At that time, they couldn't blame her for being impolite. The moment Ning Shu came out, Duan Xinghui felt as if time had slowed down. He saw Princess Jiahui, who was still wearing her riding clothes with a whip hanging from her waist. Her long ponytail made her look elegant and noble, which made people sigh in admiration. Ning Shu came out and stood on the steps. He carefully looked at Arya, who was kneeling on the ground. Her face was painted with makeup, and her eyebrows were drawn into thin willow leaf eyebrows. She was dressed in silk and satin. Ning Shu could only say that this dress was really ugly. Arya originally had thick eyebrows and big eyes, but she insisted on making her willow eyebrows. Her eyebrows and eyes were not in proportion. Now Ning Shu felt that Arya was not as good as the first time he saw her at the city gate. Looking at the high and mighty Princess Jiahui, her whole body seemed to be shining, especially her flawless face. There were no pearls or jade on her body, but she was so noble that people could not look directly at her. Arya felt more and more inferior in her heart. She thought of what Yuan Dong said. Princess Jiahui should have been Duan Lang's wife, and Duan Lang should have been the prince consort. Yuan Dong said that it was all because of her that Princess Jiahui was angry, and Duan Lang lost his position as the general. Arya wanted to beg Princess Jiahui to not blame Duan Lang anymore. "Princess, do you still remember me?" Arya asked Ning Shu. Ning Shu was speechless. Was it really okay to talk to a princess like this in such a tone? "Princess, it's all my fault. Please don't blame Duan Lang anymore." Arya bitterly shouted to Ning Shu. "Please don't be angry. As long as you don't blame Duan Lang, I will do anything you want." Duan Xinghui, who was standing in the crowd, had a complicated expression on his face. His heart was sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and salty. He was both touched and embarrassed. Ning Shu, on the other hand, felt as if his balls were about to burst. What the hell did this mean? He felt that he was the villain who broke up the Mandarin ducks. She had never thought of getting involved in this person's love, but these people still insisted on finding her. These words sounded like he was using public office to avenge private wrongs. If he had a temper, he should go find Li Wen. It was Li Wen who gave the imperial edict. Why did he come and make trouble with her? Did he really think that he was a pushover? Ning Shu took the whip from his waist. The male lead had already whipped her. He didn't know how it felt to whip the female lead. How did she become so violent? Not good, not good. Duan Xinghui saw the princess take off the whip. He thought of the pain of the whip on a person's body. It was as if his meridians were broken. Even when he saw the whip now, Duan Xinghui felt that his arm was very painful. Duan Xinghui quickly ran over, hugged Arya, who was kneeling on the ground, and dodged to one side to avoid Ning Shu's whip. Ning Shu calmly took back his whip. He had long found Duan Xinghui in the crowd. Tut, tut, he let his woman kneel here and beg for mercy, while he hid aside. This Duan Xinghui's character, tut, tut. Ning Shu really didn't know what made the original owner so persistent about Duan Xinghui. He guessed that she was not reconciled in her heart and got angry. She had to snatch this man. It was good to have someone snatching it, and people were the same. Looking carefully, Duan Xinghui was not a good person at all. Arya looked at Duan Xinghui in astonishment, and tears fell down. She couldn't help hugging Duan Xinghui in public. "Greetings to Princess Jiahui." Duan Xinghui stood in front of Area. Ning Shu saluted with a fist and palm salute. Ning Shu hummed and said nothing. She stood on the steps and looked down at Duan Xinghui. Such a posture made Duan Xinghui uncomfortable. Although he knew that Princess Jihui really had no feelings for him, her behavior really made Duan Xinghui feel very uncomfortable. In the past, Princess Jihui would not do such a contemptuous action to him. Your Highness, this matter has nothing to do with Area. Why did Your Highness do such a thing? Area is a woman. How can she withstand Your Highness's whip? Duan Xinghui said in a reproachful tone. Ning Shu pursed her lips and suddenly laughed. How dare you? Are you blaming me? Duan Xinghui didn't take care of your woman. The next time you come to my mansion to make trouble, I'll get out of the capital. I'll make you unable to stay in the capital. If there's a next time... Ning Shu pointed at Duan Xinghui and Area with her whip. I'll whip your faces. Do you really think my princess mansion is a vegetable market? You come to my door every day to make trouble. Ning Shu said, and whipped Duan Xinghui on the shoulder. Duan Xinghui let out a muffled groan, his face deathly pale. Area, on the other hand, was scared silly. Seeing Duan Xinghui stumble twice and kneel on the ground, she wailed and cried, Duan Lang, Duan Lang. Area looked at Ning Shu with fear in her eyes. Her black face suddenly turned white and looked much better. Duan Xinghui covered his wound. He had just recovered and now he was whipped again. Duan Xinghui raised his head and looked at Ning Shu's cold and impatient face. His heart trembled. Only now did Duan Xinghui truly understand that Princess Jihui was no longer the gentle and considerate person who used to be. She was full of the pride and nobility of a member of the imperial family. Looking at his strange and cold eyes, Duan Xinghui felt some pain in his heart. He lost something that he didn't cherish before. It made him feel uncomfortable and angry. Why did the princess become like this? Chapter 52. When Madame Duan saw that her son was injured again, she was distressed and angry. This anger was directed at Ning Shu and Area. Because of Princess Jiahui's identity, Madame Duan did not dare to show her resentment. But for Area, Madame Duan did not hesitate to stare at her fiercely and viciously. Seeing Madame Duan's eyes, Ning Shu did not hesitate to believe that Madame Duan wanted to kill Area. There was no more harmonious mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship as in the original plot. Ning Shu felt very comfortable. The happy life of Duan Xinghui, Area, and Madame Duan was built on the original owner. Thinking of a princess ending up like that, Ning Shu felt intoxicated. Princess, why did you do this? Duan Xinghui's face was pale, and he asked Ning Shu in a trembling voice. Why did she do this? Ning Shu sneered. I was happy. Seeing that Duan Xinghui was angry but did not dare to say anything and covered his wound, Ning Shu said lightly, I just swung my whip, and you hit it. Listening to such unreasonable words, Duan Xinghui almost vomited blood and looked at Ning Shu ferociously. Duan Xinghui, without the halo of a general, was so down and out. His face was unshaven, and he looked so decadent. He did not have the courage and calmness on horseback in the original owner's memory. Tut-tut, seeing the princess, sizing him up, Duan Xinghui didn't know why, but he felt embarrassed. He didn't want the princess to see him like this. He wanted to show his best side in front of her. Duan Xinghui unconsciously puffed out his chest. Ning Shu looked away and said to Madame Duan, who was unhappy, Madame Duan, I respect you as an elder. Take care of your family. If there is a next time, I can't guarantee anything. Madame Duan looked at Princess Jihui, who seemed to be a different person. She lowered her head, gritted her teeth, and bowed. Thank you for your forgiveness, Princess. I promise there will be no next time. Madame Duan's heart felt as if it had been ruthlessly ravaged by someone. She had lost her husband in her early years, but she had gritted her teeth and endured it, allowing her son to be so outstanding. Madame Duan had a tough personality, but She was also an extremely intelligent woman. Madame Duan felt offended when Princess Jiahui, who was originally in her hands, suddenly lost control of herself. Especially when Princess Jiahui was so rude to her. To put it bluntly, Madame Duan had been spoiled by the previous Princess Jiahui. Now that Ningxu was acting like a princess, Madame Duan couldn't stand it anymore. Mrs. Duan covered up her thoughts and left with the injured Duan Xinghui. Ningxu also saw with his sharp eyes that Mrs. Duan pinched Gu Aria's waist twice. Aria jumped up in pain, but Duan Xinghui didn't see it at all. Ningxu smiled. It was estimated that Aria would have a hard time in the future. Mrs. Duan had many means to deal with people. His own mother dealt with his beloved. He didn't know if Duan Xinghui would treat the original owner as coldly and ruthlessly as he did in the plot. Tut-tut, both the palm and the back of the hand were flesh. It hurt to be hit with a wooden stick. Ningxu laughed very unsympathetically. Ningxu counted the days and took a horse out of the stable. He was ready to go to the royal manor to see the growth of the sweet potatoes. It should be the season for sweet potatoes to be harvested now, but he didn't know what they looked like. Ningxu didn't take anyone with him. He rode to the manor alone. Speaking of riding, Ningxu felt that it was very hard. The process of learning to ride was full of bitterness and tears. After learning for 2 or 3 months, he could finally shoot an arrow on the back of the horse without holding the reins, so that he wouldn't fall to the ground. When they arrived at the manor, Shen Qingqing gave the reins to the steward and went straight to the place where the sweet potatoes were planted. When they arrived at the land where the sweet potatoes were planted, the sweet potatoes were growing lush and green. It seemed that the people in the manor were taking good care of them. Ningxu took a hoe and dug up a few stalks of sweet potatoes. The results surprised Ningxu. The red skin of the sweet potatoes was the size of a fist. Ningxu laughed from the bottom of his heart. Whether it was because of the mission or because there was another type of food that could satisfy the hunger of the common people, Ningxu's heart was full of excitement. Dig up all of these sweet potatoes for this princess and measure the land. This princess wants to calculate the yield. Ningxu said loudly. There were many tenant farmers in the manor. In a short while, the potatoes were all dug up. The steward took a scale and began to weigh the sweet potatoes. Princess, this thing actually has a yield of 500 jin. The steward Ningxu said. Ningxu was very happy. In this era, the influence of various conditions, such as drought or flood, had an impact on the yield of grain. It was good to have a yield of 700 jin of rice. In special times, having sweet potatoes could at least satisfy hunger. Moreover, it was a crop that was resistant to drought. Move some of this princess's manor. As for the rest, dig up a cellar and store them well. After a while, the emperor may come to inspect. This time, you have done a great service. Wait for the reward. The steward and the tenant farmer's face showed joy. They said in unison, "Thank you, princess." The tenant farmers moved a basket of sweet potatoes to the princess's manor. When Ningxu returned to the princess's manor, he roasted the sweet potatoes. While the sweet potatoes were still warm, he directly rode to the palace. When he arrived at the palace gate, he dismounted and went to Li Wen's imperial study. Li Wen was discussing matters with the ministers. Ningxu waited at the door for a while before he saw the ministers come out one after another. When they saw Ningxu, their eyes were very strange. Ningxu's heart jumped. According to the time, it should be the time when the Xiongnu people requested the marriage. Then what was the meaning of these people's eyes? Could it be that they still wanted to go for the marriage?
Fuck.
Ningxu collected his chaotic thoughts and carried the food box in. Ningxu saw the little gray ball lying on the desk sleeping. He did not know if it was Ningxu's illusion, but the little gray ball had grown fat. Its body was rounder than before. Li Wen narrowed his eyes and looked at Ningxu. He asked, "Why did you suddenly come to find me?" "Royal brother, your sister has brought you something good." Ningxu lifted the food box in his hand. Li Wen looked at the food box with an indifferent expression. There were too many people sending things to his study. Li Wen really did not have any thoughts. Hearing Ningxu's voice, The little gray ball opened its eyes. Its black bean-like eyes looked at him. Its wet nose twitched. It propped up its body and used its claws to dig at the food box. This guy's nose is so sharp. Royal brother, you will be very happy when you see this. Ningshu looked at Li Wen's indifferent expression and felt even worse. This guy is not really going to marry me, right? The little gray ball squeaked. Ningshu opened the food box and took out the roasted sweet potatoes. Suddenly, a sweet smell filled the air, but it was very refreshing. The roasted sweet potatoes on the plate did not look good. Li Wen narrowed his eyes and looked at the things on the plate. He seemed to have thought of something and looked at Ningshu with a questioning gaze. Chapter 53. The little gray ball directly fell onto the plate. Ningshu quickly shook it off and took one to break into two. He ate half of it and handed the other half to Li Wen. Ningshu's actions were to tell Li Wen that this thing could be eaten and that it wasn't poisonous. Li Wen took the sweet potato. The skin of the sweet potato was still stained with black ash. Li Wen imitated Ningshu and peeled the skin before eating it. It tasted sweet. Li Wen nodded. What food is this? Ningshu saw that Li Wen's expression was still interested, so he said, Brother, I call this thing sweet potato. It's something I found in the manor last time. I've sent people to plant it. The output has reached 500 kilograms, Ningshu said. This thing can fill one's hunger. Is that so? Li Wen's face revealed anxiety and surprise. Clearly, he understood the use of this thing. Does the manor still have this thing? I got people to keep it well. It's now in the manor's cellar, Ningshu said. Li Wen nodded and said, I'll leave the palace with you and go to the manor to take a look. All right. Li Wen definitely had to take a look at such a matter that concerned the livelihood of the people. Li Wen and Ningshu rode straight to the manor with a group of cavalry following behind them. When the emperor went out, he had to have someone by his side. When they arrived at the manor, Li Wen first looked at the potatoes and then at the land where the potatoes were planted. He got someone to measure the land again, and the result was the same. Li Wen, who had always been cold, revealed a slight smile. His eyes were very bright as he looked at Ningshu with a gentler gaze. He said to Ningshu, Jiehui, you're very good. Very good. Ningshu only smiled and said, I'm very happy to be able to work for you. I know that you have the people in your heart. I'm a member of the royal family and rely on the people to support me. It's only right for me to work for the people. It could be said that the entire noble class was supported by the people, but these nobles still looked down on the people. Li Wen clearly did not expect that Ningshu would say such words. She was gratified and said, Jiehui has grown up and is sensible. She's no longer obsessed with those inexplicable matters. Ningshu sweated profusely. I'll have to trouble you with the planting in the future. There was a slight smile on Li Wen's face. Her attitude towards Ningshu was very gentle. The steward of the manor and the tenant farmers know what to do. Actually, I found it by accident. It's not a big deal. It would be great if I could help Imperial brother. By the way, how did you find out that this thing is edible? Li Wen squinted her eyes and asked. Ningshu's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't say that she knew. Speaking of which, it's all because of the little gray ball. Sister Chen saw this little thing holding this thing in the woods, and then she tasted it herself. Although the raw one is not as delicious as the cooked one, Ningshu directly pushed the blame to the little gray ball. Li Wen knew that the little gray ball liked to eat. Li Wen nodded and floated back to the palace. Ningshu heaved a sigh of relief. She had finally proven her worth in front of Li Wen. She should have hesitated a little when she was asked to go through with the marriage. But Ningshu's heart was still heavy. Then the next marriage, whether the task could be successful or not depended on this marriage. In fact, the task this time was almost completed. Don't love Duan Xinghui. Well, it was done. Let Duan Xinghui and Arya, this pair of bitches, not have a good ending. Well, this was almost the same. If it went on like this, it was estimated that Arya and Duan Xinghui would become a resentful couple. There were many obstacles in their love. In the original plot, It was because Arya saved a marquis's wife that her status was raised and Madame Duan accepted her. But because of Yuan Dong stirring up trouble in the Duan manor, Arya couldn't even go out and had to learn the rules every day. He really didn't know if Arya would be bound by the rules and act according to the rules. Would Duan Xinghui still like her? Sure enough, as Ning Shu expected, it didn't take long for the Xiongnu envoys to arrive in the capital. This time, it was the second son of the Khan, the second prince of the grassland. The original host was married to this second prince. In the capital, he heard that the original host was fighting for a man with a filthy reputation. He had a bad impression of the original host. After the marriage, he was treated inhumanely. The Xiongnu was a place without propriety, justice, integrity, and shame. Women were like goods there. Although the original host was married to the second prince, what made the original host collapse was that the second prince's brothers would share her and humiliate her. This was simply a place where the devil stayed. The original host was very afraid of the second prince. Now, when he heard the second prince's name, Ning Shu's body couldn't help trembling. This was the original host's emotion. Fear was mixed with hatred. Generally speaking, it was mostly fear. After suffering so much torture, the original host was like a mouse seeing a cat when he saw the second prince. He had the fear of being killed. Ning Shu clenched his fist. He was determined not to be married to the second prince. Otherwise, how could he help the original host counterattack? If he wanted to change the original host's fate, he had to change the fate of the marriage. Sure enough, the Xiongnu envoys proposed the marriage in the court. Moreover, they requested the Great Yang's only Princess Jihui. The ministers all said that they wanted Ning Shu to be married, but Li Wen didn't say anything. He seemed to agree but also seemed to disagree. He didn't say anything, making the Xiongnu envoys somewhat dissatisfied. However, they didn't dare to be presumptuous. Sure enough, this was the power of the plot. Even though Ning Shu's reputation hadn't been tarnished, and she hadn't been involved in the scandal of a dignified princess fighting for a man, she still couldn't avoid the fate of the marriage. The canon Fodder supporting female lead was truly miserable. What could she do now? She could only stop crying and stand up. What made Ning Shu rejoice was that Li Wen did not immediately agree to the marriage. Clearly, the matter of the sweet potato occupied a bit of a place in Li Wen's heart. Sure enough, currying favor with Li Wen was the most correct choice. Since he was at the side of the emperor, who held the power of life and death in his hands, he had to surmise the emperor's thoughts. Clearly, Ning Shu had gambled correctly. The envoys settled down in the capital. What made Ning Shu speechless was that the second prince actually came to the princess's residence to pay a visit. Ning Shu only had one word for this: scram. Sure enough, the second prince didn't follow the rules. What would others think of the second prince coming to pay a visit like this? She reckoned that she and the second prince already had an affair. This second prince was truly sinister and extremely malicious. Ning Shu didn't hesitate to use the greatest malice to speculate about the second prince. In the original host's memories, the second prince had the cruelty and craftiness of a wild wolf of the grasslands. His natural disposition was malicious, and his torture of the original host was simply beyond the limits of what a human could endure. After marrying him, Princess Jihui was tortured to death 2 years later. Ning Shu remained in the princess's residence, refusing to leave. The second prince didn't see Princess Jihui and could only return in disappointment. He had heard that Princess Jihui was quite beautiful. Chapter 54. When the second prince left, Ning Shu packed up and prepared to go to the palace. Damn, Ning Shu didn't believe that the second prince would actually block her in the palace. With Li Wen in the palace, the second prince wouldn't dare to jump around in front of Li Wen even if he had 10 times the courage. After all this time, she still had to go back to the palace. Ning Shu sat in the carriage, and the carriage went to the palace. She didn't know why Ning Shu was a little uneasy. It was undeniable that the original owner's deep-rooted fear had affected her, so she had to hurry to confirm the marriage with Li Wen. She thought that this task was simple. Compared with the trivial matter of Duan Xinghui and area, it was nothing in front of national affairs. The most important thing in this task was not to be married. Ning Shu was thinking about something when the carriage suddenly stopped. The horse neighed. Ning Shu in the carriage grabbed the wooden frame to stabilize her body and said, "What's going on?" "Princess, princess, did someone control the horse?" the coachman said with some trepidation. Ning Shu had a bad feeling in her heart. She bit her lips and lifted the curtain. She saw a man holding the reins of the horse, stopping the running horse. Ning Shu saw the man. She didn't feel anything in her heart, but her body trembled in fear. It was the second prince. Damn. Ning Shu endured all kinds of tumbling emotions in her heart. She gritted her teeth and took the whip from her waist to whip the man. However, the second prince actually dodged Ning Shu's whip. He turned over and sat on the back of the horse pulling the carriage, looking at Ning Shu in surprise. Ning Shu's heart sank. The second prince could actually dodge her whip. She had practiced the whip for so long and was very skilled and fast. She had whipped Duan Xinghui twice, but Duan Xinghui didn't dodge. This man was much stronger than Duan Xinghui. "You are Princess Jihui. Why did you hit me when you saw me?" The second prince looked at Ning Shu with sharp and explicit eyes, with satisfaction in his eyes. Under the second prince's eyes, Ning Shu's body trembled uncontrollably. This was the body's conditioned reflex of fear. She was afraid of this man. "Do you know who I am?" the second prince asked Ning Shu. His voice was very low, with a hint of magnetism, but it gave Ning Shu a creepy feeling. That feeling was like the sound of a snake's skin rubbing against fine sand. Ning Shu coldly snorted and didn't speak. She was afraid that if she spoke, her voice would reveal her trembling voice. The second prince dodged again and stared at Ning Shu with a pair of sharp eyes. He berated, "This prince is talking to you. Why aren't you replying? Are you Princess Jihui?" Damn. How could this man be so powerful? Ning Shu bit her lips. She had to overcome this body's fear of the man in front of her. She had to completely control this body so that she wouldn't be controlled by it. Ning Shu wondered when she would be able to suppress her emotions during the mission. Ning Shu took a deep breath and shouted. She jumped down from the carriage and started to fight with the second prince. Ning Shu clenched her teeth and swung her whip with all her strength. The whip violently rubbed against the air, creating an explosive sound. Seeing that Ning Shu was acting as if he had killed his father, the second prince had no choice but to become serious. As he dodged the whip, he tried to approach Ning Shu and restrain Ning Shu. However, Ning Shu refused to let him get close. If it weren't for the weak flow of air in his body, Ning Shu probably wouldn't have been able to hold on. Fuck, why is this perverted man so powerful? The second prince seemed to have lost his patience and suddenly grabbed Ning Shu's whip. The spikes on the whip pierced the second prince's palm. The second prince released Ning Shu's whip in shock. Looking at his bloody palm, he frowned. "What are you doing? I only wanted to say a few words to you. Are you crazy?" Ning Shu's entire body was drenched in cold sweat. His fear of the second prince lessened. This was still Great Yong's territory. Even if Ning Shu ignored him, he wouldn't dare do anything. "Are you Jihui's?" The second prince ignored the blood on his hand as he asked Ning Shu. Ning Shu nobly raised his chin and indifferently replied, "This prince is Princess Jihui." Audacious madman. You actually dare to block this prince's carriage. Hearing Ning Shu admit that he was Princess Jihui, the second prince's eyes brightened. The corners of his mouth curled up as he said, "You should know who I am. The person who wants to marry you, Helianing? Remember that?" Helianing enunciated each word clearly. Ning Shu was so angry that he laughed. Why did the second prince think that he wanted to marry him? Ning Shu couldn't be bothered to speak with the second prince. He directly boarded the carriage and said to the driver, "Enter the palace." This time, Helianing didn't stop Ning Shu. Instead, she watched until the horse carriage disappeared around the corner. Then, she lowered her head and looked at her own hand. Blood dripped onto the bluestone pavement of the street, splashing into a flower of blood. Princess Jiehui Li Xueshan. Ningxu first returned to his palace, Orchid Palace Hall, and was warmly welcomed by Miao Qing. After not seeing her for a while, Ningxu felt that Miao Qing, this flower, had withered a lot. Guarding such an empty palace hall was no different from the cold palace. Ningxu didn't have any good feelings towards Miao Qing. Ningxu had just sat in Orchid Palace Hall for a while when the Empress arrived. When she saw Ningxu, the first thing she asked was whether he wanted to live in the palace for a long time. Ningxu nodded, and the Empress smiled. Then, after a few polite words, her face became melancholy. Ningxu said, "It's a pity that you're going to marry someone. I will persuade your brother not to let you go to that barren place. It's a pity that noble concubine Du's mother's family firmly supports your marriage in the imperial court. How can noble concubine Du be so cruel to let a girl like you leave her hometown?" The battle between the Empress and noble concubine Du had always been fierce. At this time, the Empress still wanted to deal with noble concubine Du before her marriage. Obviously, the Empress thought that she couldn't escape this time. As for persuading Li Wen, this kind of words should be listened to. If it was taken seriously, it would be disgusting. Ningxu was really tired and said directly, "Sister-in-law, whether I will marry someone or not, it's up to my brother to decide. It's not up to you or noble concubine Du to decide." Ningxu's words were a bit impolite. She almost directly said, "Don't meddle in my affairs." Looking at Ningxu's ugly face, the Empress was very worried. She cursed in her heart that she deserved the marriage, but on the surface, she showed an understanding expression and persuaded Ningxu, "You don't have to worry too much. Your brother loves you so much. He won't let you leave your hometown alone." Although she was persuading, her tone was sour. Ningxu said directly, "Sister-in-law, I'm tired." The Empress's face stiffened, and finally she could only leave. After the Empress left, the imperial concubines in the harem all rushed to Orchid Palace Hall. Ningxu was really impatient to see these people. Her time was not wasted on these women. Chapter 55. When he saw the second prince before entering the palace, he was even more determined to not go through with the marriage. This was not only a task, but also the reaction of this body when he saw the second prince. The fear and despair in his heart made Ningxu sad. He did not even have the thought of resisting, only fear, like a lamb to be slaughtered. Ningxu tidied up for a while and went to the imperial study to find Li Wen. As if knowing that Ningxu would come back, the eunuch beside Li Wen let Ningxu in. Ningxu took a deep breath and walked in. Li Wen was reviewing memorials. When Ningxu came in, he did not raise his head. After Ningxu bowed, Li Wen put down the cinnabar pen in his hand, looked at Ningxu and asked, "Have you eaten?"
"No."
Ningxu said honestly, "My sister is upset and can't eat." Li Wen said directly, "The second prince of the northern desert, Liaoning, wants to marry you. Our two countries should be on good terms. What do you think?" Ningxu sneered. The Xiongnu people were the Xiongnu people. Did they think that the northern desert was high and mighty? "Brother, do you want to hear a lie or the truth?" Ningxu looked straight at Li Wen. Li Wen raised his eyebrows. "Just say it." Ningxu knelt on the ground, bit his lips and said, "My sister doesn't want to go through with the marriage." "Oh, the reason?" Li Wen's expression was indifferent, as if he was not surprised by Ningxu's refusal. "My sister has already fought with Liaoning. He is very powerful, but there is an even more powerful prince above him." Ningxu gritted his teeth and said, when he came to this world, Ningxu knew clearly about the original owner of the body. According to the original owner's memory, when the original owner married, the two of them fought fiercely. "Yes, I did." "Are you hurt?" Li Wen's eyes were watery as she looked at Ningxu with a gentle gaze. "Imperial brother, bandits are bandits. The Xiongnu plundered the borders of the Great Yong Empire and killed the citizens of the Great Yong Empire. This kind of bandit behavior should not be forgiven. Chanmei has enjoyed the glory of the imperial family and can marry into the Great Yong Empire to repay the imperial family. However, this kind of behavior will only encourage the other party's arrogance. For the grand Great Yong dynasty to compromise like this, how can we face the people living on the borders? Ning Shu gritted his teeth. In addition, this time, the Xiongnu not only want to marry the princess of Great Yong, they also want to scrape away the wealth of the common people. If there is a first time, there will be a second time. Ning Shu's tone was filled with grief and indignation. This was no longer an attempt to persuade Li Wen, but rather the feelings of the original owner. The original owner had personally witnessed the people living on the border being captured and enslaved. However, at that time, the original owner had been in hell, painfully struggling. His life was even more miserable than that of the slaves. Li Wen's expression was somewhat cold. It was unknown whether it was because of Ning Shu's words or because of other reasons, but the current Li Wen's aura was very cold. The dignity and solemnity of an emperor made Ning Shu somewhat unable to breathe. Ning Shu clenched his teeth and knelt on the ground. Sonorously and forcefully, he said, "Imperial brother, Chunmei is willing to become Imperial brother's pawn. I want Imperial brother's dynasty to not marry into the Great Yong Empire, to not pay reparations, to not cede land, and to not pay tribute. The Son of Heaven will guard the country's gates, and the monarch will die to protect the country." Li Wen stared blankly, looking at Ning Shu with a complicated expression. He asked, "What do you want to do?" "Chop off the hand that the Xiongnu have extended into Great Yong. If we continue to beat them until they are afraid, Chunmei is willing to take command of the battlefield and not rest until my death." Ning Shu spoke sonorously and forcefully, even his body trembling slightly. Li Wen's lips curled into a smile. Walking around the desk, he walked in front of Ning Shu. Extending his hand, he helped Ning Shu up. Somewhat unable to stifle his laughter, he said, "Since ancient times, when has there ever been a woman taking command? There were too many. Hua Mulan Mu Guiying. It seemed that there were no precedents in this world. We will not allow you to marry into the Great Yong Empire. As for the matter of taking command, we will consider it again. Go and have your meal," Li Wen warmly said, appearing somewhat like an older brother. "Jihui, you have become sensible." Every time he heard Li Wen say that he had become sensible, Ning Shu would sweat profusely. Exiting the imperial study, Ning Shu's entire body was weak and limp, his back covered in cold sweat. He could finally put down the large stone in his heart. Returning to the Orchid Garden Palace Hall, Ning Shu ate a little before lying down on his bed and falling into a deep sleep. After sleeping for an unknown amount of time, he was awakened by Miao Qing, who said that there was a banquet for the Northern Desert's diplomatic mission. Ning Shu took off his light riding clothes and put on the luxurious princess's palace attire that he had not worn in a long time. His head was filled with ornaments, and his clothes were long-sleeved. It was incomparably complicated. Ning Shu felt somewhat unaccustomed to it, feeling as if his neck was about to be bent from the weight of the things on his head. Miao Qing wanted to follow Ning Shu, but how could Ning Shu allow her to do as she wished? He wanted to make sure that she did not see Li Wen. "You will die of thirst." Under Miao Qing's deeply hidden resentment, Ning Shu walked towards the banquet hall. The hall was brightly lit, and the sound of musical instruments poured out from every corner of the hall. Mixed with the intoxicating atmosphere, it formed a flashy and pleasurable atmosphere that made people indulge in. Ning Shu walked into the hall, causing the atmosphere in the hall to become heavy. Everyone looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu cursed in his heart. These men were enjoying themselves and using a woman in exchange for peace. Were they still men? "Jihui, come to me." Li Wen beckoned Ning Shu. Ning Shu ignored the domineering gaze of the second prince from the Northern Desert's diplomatic mission group. He walked to Li Wen, bowed to Li Wen, and then sat down on his own seat. Helian Ying's gaze followed him like a shadow. Ning Shu felt as if there were nails piercing into his body, making him extremely uncomfortable. "What are you looking at?" Helian Ying glared at Ning Shu and then froze for a moment. Previously, when he was fighting with this fellow, he did not notice. Now that he looked at him, This fellow's appearance was truly wild. His hair was loose, his collar was slightly open, and he wore a necklace strung together with wolf fangs. He had a thin waist and narrow buttocks. His skin was bronze, and his facial features were deep. From head to toe, he was brimming with masculinity and wildness. He was different from the men of the Great Yong dynasty. The men of the Great Yong dynasty were particular about elegance and nobility. TSK. No matter how good-looking he was, it could not hide his scum nature. His personality was wild and cruel. This kind of man was a nightmare for women. Seeing that Ning Shu was sizing him up, Second Prince Helianing bared his white teeth at Ning Shu. His eyes were filled with the determination to win. Especially when the other party's cold gaze was sizing him up, Helianing felt the blood in his heart begin to boil. It was like a wild wolf that had found its target, with a cruel gaze and expectation. She was different from the light clothes she wore before. She looked valiant and formidable, and her entire body carried a fierce aura. Now, she was dressed in luxurious clothes, and her expression was cold. Under the contrast of her luxurious clothes, she looked exceptionally proud and noble. Helianing suddenly laughed. Under the illumination of the light, his white teeth reflected a snow-white light, making people feel a chill in their hearts. Helianing raised his wine cup and drank a cup of wine from Ning Shu, his eyes shining brightly. Ning Shu sneered, turned his head, and did not look at him. He also pretended that he did not see Helianing's toast. Chapter 56. Ning Shu looked at the complacent Helianing and sneered. How could he be so certain that he would marry Princess Yong? Helianing was too confident. In any case, Great Yong was a large country. The current Princess Jiahui was not as loathsome as in the plot. Halfway through the banquet, when the dancers had all left, Helianing stood up from his seat and walked to the center of the hall. His movements were filled with explosive power, as if a cheetah had suddenly leapt out. His masculine face alone could charm many women, but his insides were pitch black. Seeing Helianing's actions, everyone thought that the main show had arrived. In reality, today's banquet would determine Princess Jiahui's future fate. Helianing first glanced at Ning Shu, who was sitting there with an indifferent expression and a mocking expression. Helianing smiled and cupped his fist towards Ning Shu. In a clear voice, he said, "Great Yong's Imperial Majesty, my country is willing to marry Great Yong to form friendly relations." Helianing looked at Ning Shu. This prince fell in love with Princess Jiahui at first sight. My heart is in love with her. Ning Shu rolled his eyes. What fucking fell in love with her? Ning Shu gave him the middle finger in his mind. What heart is in love with her? Nothing more than taking a fancy to Jiahui's dowry and fief. Immoral. Ning Shu did not even bother to look at Helianing. He lowered his head and drank his fruit wine, unperturbed. Li Wen's gaze wandered back and forth between Helianing and Ning Shu. Li Wen's expression was somewhat unsightly, his gaze deep. Li Wen indifferently asked, "Jiahui, what do you think?" "You are in love with the second prince of the northern desert." Li Wen did not even mention Helianing's name, directly addressing the second prince of the northern desert. Ning Shu stood up, sonorously and forcefully saying, "My younger sister does not like the second prince of the northern desert." Li Wen nodded his head in satisfaction and said to Helianing, "Jiahui is our only younger sister. Naturally, I am unwilling to have my younger sister marry off to another country." The expression on Helianing's face froze. Soon after, she looked at Ning Shu with a smile that wasn't a smile. She didn't say anything, but she also knew that she hadn't achieved her goal this time. At this moment, Ning Shu finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had finally escaped the fate of a political marriage, but the price was expensive. Ning Shu glanced at Helianing and met his gaze. Helianing's gaze appeared malicious and deep. On the other hand, Ning Shu felt like he was being stared at by Lone Wolf. Ning Shu expressed that he was not afraid of Lone Wolf. Since a political marriage was not possible, then the goal of having the Great Yong dynasty cede territory and pay reparations, as well as the dowry of a princess, could not be achieved. Before the Mabe diplomatic mission left, they faced the capital and pointed their fingers, vowing to make the great Yong dynasty pay the price. Lianing sat on horseback and raised her head to look at Ningxu, who was standing on top of the city gate. Ningxu was wearing a light riding outfit, and her hair was tied into a high ponytail. She looked down from above and met her gaze. Ningxu narrowed his eyes, looking at Lianing. Intuition told him that he would see this fellow again in the future. Given the entanglement between the original owner of his body and Lianing, they were originally husband and wife. There shouldn't be no entanglement between them. Lianing reached out to Ningxu, as if he could grab her from a distance. Afterwards, she placed her fingers on her lips and lied, gently kissing them, as if she was kissing Ningxu. Afterwards, Ningxu smiled. With a flick of his whip, he turned his horse around and galloped away. Seeing Lianing's actions, Ningxu's entire body turned cold. He turned around and returned to the princess's residence. After the Mabe diplomatic mission left, Li Wen immediately appointed Xinfeng as the Grand Marshal and, directly, led the army towards the border. Everyone knew that Mabe wouldn't give up so easily. Xinfeng was a general around 40 years old. He was a general who had experienced many battles. No one was surprised by this appointment. However, what they didn't expect was that Li Wen actually appointed Princess Jiehui, Li Xueshan, as the left vanguard. Letting a woman go to war was something that had never happened before. It caused a huge uproar in the imperial court. The waves of opposition came wave after wave. Li Wen only said one sentence to shut these pedantic scholars up. If you don't want Princess Jiehui to go, then you guys can go. It doesn't matter if you guys aren't in the imperial court. Looking at Li Wen's attitude, it seemed like he really wanted to send these weak civil officials to the border. Moreover, he immediately asked them to prepare their things and leave. Then, these people were speechless. After shrinking their necks, they didn't say anything else. After Ningxu received the imperial edict, he immediately started to prepare his things. All the necessities were prepared. Little Red helped Ningxu organize a lot of things. She asked, "Princess, are you really going to war?" The imperial edict had already been issued. There were even some fake ones. He bragged too much to Li Wen. Now it was time to redeem his promise. Ningxu first went to see Xinfeng. Xinfeng didn't have any special opinions about Ningxu going to war. He only said that there was no distinction between men and women on the battlefield. Ningxu said that he would listen to the command. However, Ningxu didn't expect to see Duan Xinghui. Moreover, he saw Duan Xinghui beside Xinfeng. Ningxu looked at Duan Xinghui in surprise. Xinfeng explained to Ningxu, "Duan Xinghui is now my bodyguard. I saw that Duan Xinghui is quite capable. He failed the first time because he didn't have any guidance." Well, the male lead was indeed different. He had nobles helping him wherever he went. Moreover, he had become the bodyguard of the Grand Marshal. His contributions on the battlefield were huge. In addition, he had a strong destiny. Was this guy going to rise again? However, Ningxu didn't say anything. When it came to the country's major issues, personal issues could be put aside first. "Marshal, you can make the decision," Ningxu said to Marshal Shen. "Xinghui, send the princess off for me," Xinfeng said to Duan Xinghui. Xinfeng cupped his fist toward Xinfeng and said to Ningxu, "Princess Jiehui, please." Ningxu looked at him indifferently and turned to leave. Duan Xinghui followed behind Ningxu and looked at her long ponytail swinging as she walked. Her posture was elegant and graceful. Seeing that Princess Jiehui didn't say a word to him and ignored him, Duan Xinghui suddenly felt lost. It was undeniable that Princess Jiehui was really outstanding. Thinking that he would be going to the battlefield with Princess Jiehui this time. For some reason, Duan Xinghui's heart actually had a slight expectation. Princess. Duan Xinghui originally wanted to say a few words to Ningxu, but Ningxu left the general's residence and directly got on the horse without even looking at him. Duan Xinghui's voice was shattered in the wind. Duan Xinghui was helpless and could only ride back to the Duan residence. Knowing that Duan Xinghui was going to the battlefield, Arya was excited. To be precise, she strongly opposed it. Duan Lang, did you forget that you were injured last time? Arya said emotionally, you were seriously injured last time. Duan Lang, don't go, okay? Duan Xinghui was helpless and could only say, I'm a general. I need to stand out. As a soldier, dying on the battlefield is the final destination. Chapter 57. In short, Arya was obsessed with Duan Xinghui and didn't want him to go to the battlefield. First, when Duan Xinghui was rescued by her last time, he was covered in blood and looked like he was going to die, which left a deep impression on Arya. Second, in the capital city, she was closest to Duan Xinghui and had to rely on him alone. If Duan Xinghui left the capital city and left her here alone, Arya felt scared just thinking about it. In this Duan mansion, except for Duan Xinghui, no one else was close to her. They all looked down on her. There was Yuan Dong, who was full of malice to her, and Madame Duan, who hated her very much. Arya became more and more frightened. She looked timid and was no longer as simple and beautiful as before. Under the torture of Madame Duan, no matter what she did, she would think about whether it was against the rules. Sometimes when she did something wrong, these old maids who taught the rules were very clever in their means of making people suffer. You still can't forget Princess Jiahui, right? When you heard that Princess Jiahui was going to fight, you followed her. How dare you say it's not because of Princess Jiahui? Tears flowed down her face. The tears washed away the rouge on her face. The dark skin covered by the rouge was exposed, forming a distinct ravine. Duan Xinghui closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at Arya with disappointment and said, it has nothing to do with Princess Jiahui. I don't have the position of general anymore. Now I have to make a contribution. Duan Lang, it's good. You don't have to take risks. Arya sobbed and begged.
Duan Xinghui sighed deeply. He was really depressed.
Arya didn't know his ambition at all. Was he going to spend his life like this without accomplishing anything? I have to go this time. I have made a military pledge with the marshal. Do you want to see me beheaded? Duan Xinghui was very impatient when he said this. Arya used to be simple, but now it seemed that it was inappropriate. He didn't know what to think about the overall situation. Arya didn't know what he was thinking at all. He wanted to stand up again with his own strength. Going to the battlefield was a very good and quick choice. Wealth came from danger. Looking at Arya's tears, Duan Xinghui's heart was full of helplessness. Princess Jiahui's cold face appeared in his mind. He seemed to have never seen Princess Jiahui cry in front of him. She disdained to cry in front of him. They were both women, but Princess Jiahui could be strong and even go to the battlefield. However, Arya became a daughter flower that clung to him. Duan Xinghui remembered that when he first met Arya, she was bright and innocent. When she smiled at him with wildflowers in her hand, Duan Xinghui only felt that it was the most beautiful thing in the world. But now Arya no longer had the taste of freedom. From Duan Xinghui's point of view, Princess Jiahui, who had always been bound by rules, behaved in a carefree manner. Duan Xinghui felt so tired, especially when he looked at Arya, who was crying. A word came to his mind inexplicably. I don't love you. When Madame Duan heard that her son was going to the battlefield, she agreed very much. If she wanted the Duan family to recover its previous glory, she must make contributions. When she saw Arya's bitter look, she felt as if her son was going to die. Madame Duan gritted her teeth with hatred. She wanted to wait until Duan Xinghui left to deal with Arya. Receiving Madame Duan's gaze, Arya's body trembled. She felt even more bitter in her heart. She looked at Duan Xinghui with sadness in her eyes. However, Duan Xinghui couldn't see it. Duan Xinghui was busy going to the battlefield. Arya felt as if her whole body was soaked in ice water. She couldn't speak of her despair and loneliness. When it was time for the army to go to war, Ning Shu was a little excited. He was wearing armor which was a little heavy. His hair was cut short and tied into a bun. He wore a helmet, and a red cloak fluttered behind him in the wind. Ningxu looked in front of the bronze mirror and felt great. "Princess, you look like a mighty general." Little Red praised. "You should be the most handsome general." "Little girl, you know how to talk." Ningxu tapped the tip of Little Red's nose and said, "I'm leaving. Take good care of the princess's residence." I will wait for Princess to come back." Little Red said with a little choked up, "Princess, you must come back safely." Ningxu looked at Little Red's eager eyes, and a strange thought surged in his heart. Little Red looked like she was sending her husband to the battlefield. Ningxu immediately turned around and left. Oh, under such eyes, Ningxu almost fled. "Princess, you must come back safely. I will wait for you." Little Red waved her handkerchief and shouted to Ningxu. Ningxu almost fell down from the horse's back. He quickly grabbed the reins and galloped towards the army's military field. The entire drill ground was filled with an austere and tranquil atmosphere. Flags fluttered in the wind, and every soldier wore armor and held a red-tasseled spear in their hands. At a glance, they were neat and breathtaking. When Ningxu saw this scene, it was the first time he had seen the cold and cruel beauty of a cold weapon war. Boundless pride surged in his heart. For the family, for the country, for the people. Ningxu, under the influence of such an environment, had goosebumps all over his body. Boundless pride rose in his heart. This was his emotion, and it was also the emotion of the original body. Ningxu urged his horse to Xinfeng's side. Xinfeng was wearing armor, and his white beard made him look wise and farsighted. He also had the feeling of a hero past his prime. Ningxu noticed that beside Xinfeng was Duan Xinghui. It seemed that Xinfeng really thought highly of Duan Xinghui. His armor made him look very wise and mighty. He had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He was filled with the beauty of strength. No wonder the original body was so fond of him. Duan Xinghui, who was sitting on the horse's back, was especially filled with a bewitching beauty. The world's darling was really different. Xinfeng only nodded to Ningxu. This time was not suitable for talking. Ningxu only swept a glance at Duan Xinghui and then passed him by. Duan Xinghui originally wanted to say hello to her, but the other party looked at him like a stranger. She did not recognize him at all. This made Duan Xinghui's heart stifled. His anger was mixed with helplessness. Dong, dong, dong. Around the military field, there was a deep and penetrating sound of drums. The sound of the drums seemed to beat with the rhythm of the heart. It made people's heart excited. With the arrival of the emperor, Li Wen walked up to the high platform of the military field. Li Wen was wearing a black dragon robe embroidered with golden threads. On his head was the crown of the Son of Heaven. The curtain made of round and plump dragon pearls slightly trembled as he walked. This curtain covered Li Wen's face, but it made him look even more noble. Li Wen had an imposing manner that was proud of the world. When Li Wen appeared, a solemn and dignified atmosphere condensed in the air. People could not help but hold their breath. Seeing Li Wen, the entire military field was filled with the sound of clattering armor. The soldiers neatly knelt on one foot on the ground and shouted, "Long live the Emperor!" Chapter 58. Power gave a man a powerful charm. At this moment, Li Wen was the center of the world. Even Duan Xinghui, the male lead, was inferior in front of Li Wen. Ningxu saw from the corner of her eye that Duan Xinghui was looking at Emperor Li Wen with envy and confusion. Li Wen raised his voice and said some words to stir up the hearts of the people. His words were impassioned, causing the soldiers below to howl. They wished they could immediately go to the battlefield and kill the enemy. Ningxu's eyes twitched. Li Wen, who was usually cold and taciturn, could be so passionate when talking about sending people to their deaths. It could be seen that Li Wen was really determined to control the northern desert. Just the amount of food for the army of 200,000 was a shocking number. He wanted to beat the bandits of the northern desert until they were afraid. With Li Wen's full and sonorous voice, the rhythm of the drums became hurried. Mixed with the roars of the soldiers, it shook the entire capital. Jiahui. Li Wen waved his hand to Ning Shu. Ning Shu immediately jumped off the horse and went to Li Wen. He half knelt in front of Li Wen and shouted, "Greetings, brother." Li Wen put the little gray ball on Ning Shu's shoulder. Ning Shu was a little surprised. Li Wen said with his hands behind his back, "This little guy is very sensitive to danger. I tried to feed it some cakes mixed with poison, but it refused to eat. I wanted to throw it into the snake cave, but it ran away." Ning Shu, "Let it stay by your side. It will be of some use." Li Wen patted Ning Shu's shoulder heavily. It was really heavy. Ning Shu's shoulder was bent. "Come back alive." Ning Shu's nose twitched, and he almost cried. It was probably the original owner's emotions. Ning Shu also felt that although Li Wen was cold, he still had some brotherly feelings for the original owner. Ning Shu replied with a nasal voice, "Imperial brother, you should also pay more attention to your body. Your body is everything. Only with a good body can you do a lot of things and fulfill your wish of creating a prosperous era." Li Wen's expression was somewhat complicated as he said, "Go." The little gray ball squeaked and jumped onto Li Wen's body. It was obviously reluctant to let Li Wen go. Its small and sharp claws grabbed Li Wen's clothes and squeaked. Ning Shu was speechless. Li Wen had tormented it like that, but it still couldn't bear to do it. Ning Shu was very unhappy. He walked over and caught the little gray ball. The little gray ball squeaked in Ning Shu's hand. The sound was very sad. It was sad to hear it and shed tears. The army walked towards the gate. Ning Shu sat on his horse and looked at the commoners on both sides of the street sending them off. There were also some family members who looked at their loved ones in the army with tears in their eyes, as well as anticipation and worry. It was tragic and solemn. Ning Shu looked at these scenes and understood more and more why Li Wen wanted to create a prosperous era where the people lived in peace. It was just that this prosperous era had to be constantly fought, even built on blood and bones. It was just to let the world live in peace and happiness. Ning Shu's sharp eyes saw Arya and Madame Duan in the crowd, as well as Yuan Dong. Yuan Dong's head was covered with pearls and jade. She looked exactly like a rich madam, but her expression was very melancholy. Duan Xinghui probably only cared about being entangled with his true love and had neglected Yuan Dong. Duan Xinghui saw his loved ones in the crowd, his mother and his lover. For some reason, Duan Xinghui first glanced at Ning Shu and saw that her face was indifferent, as if she didn't care about anything. Duan Xinghui breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, but it was mixed with an indescribable bitterness and loss. It could only be said that things that couldn't be obtained were good things. In the plot, Jiahui desperately wanted to be with Duan Xinghui, but Duan Xinghui hated her. She was like a dogskin plaster sticking to him. Now that she ignored him, Duan Xinghui felt lost in his heart, and all kinds of pretentious mischief arose. Ning Shu only knew how to give Duan Xinghui the middle finger. How could a person be so despicable? After walking for nearly 4 hours, the marching team was completely out of the capital. At this time, the sun had risen very high. It was a little warm on people's bodies, especially when they were wearing armor, which could block the biting cold wind. Looking back, the soldiers following behind were sweaty. Their black faces were somewhat glowing, and hot white smoke came out of their bodies. "Princess, do you want to set up camp?" Shen Feng asked Ning Shu. Ning Shu could see from Shen Feng's expression that he didn't want to set up camp. Speed was the most important thing in war, but Ning Shu asked because of her identity as Princess Jiahui. Ning Shu shook her head and said, "Marshal Shen is the supreme commander. Jiahui should abide by the military rules. Marshal Shen has the final say." They had just left the capital and were about to set up camp. When would they reach the northern region? "Everyone speed up," Shen Feng shouted. Once the order was given, the soldiers carrying the flag waved the yellow flag and transmitted the message. Shen Feng no longer had scruples about Ning Shu's identity as a woman. He directly followed the strictest military order and marched until night time before setting up camp. Ning Shu finally breathed a sigh of relief and sat alone in a simple tent. After all, she was a woman and a princess of a country. There was no reason for her to sleep in the same tent as those men. However, the food was completely the same as ordinary soldiers. Ning Shu was not picky. She ate coarse noodles mixed with meat soup. Only when she was full would she have the strength to fight. Ning Shu felt that she was quite hardworking. In order to complete the mission, she had to put on armor and go to the battlefield. To be honest, Ning Shu's heart was still a little anxious. After leaving the capital, the little gray ball had been very dispirited. It looked at Ning Shu with a pair of depressed eyes. Even when Ning Shu gave half of her food to the little gray ball faced Ning Shu with its butt and looked at the sky with a sad and bright angle. Ning Shu was speechless. It felt so intoxicating. What was this guy doing? Was he so reluctant to part with Liwen? The little gray ball had a lot more spiritual energy than before. After Ning Shu finished her dinner, she got some water and washed up. After all, she was a woman. It was very inconvenient to be in a group of men. What Ning Shu did not expect was that in the middle of the night, someone had actually snuck into her tent. It seemed that they had bad intentions, and it was not just one person. Ning Shu was so angry that she laughed. Sure enough, women were in a vulnerable position. If something really happened, they could just say that they had died in battle. Ning Shu felt that she needed to make an example of them. Otherwise, there would be some lustful people in the future. Probably because they were afraid of Ning Shu's identity as a princess, these people did not go too far. Moreover, many of these people were middle-ranking generals. Ning Shu felt that there would be a chance to make them swallow their teeth and blood. The next day, when the army was marching, Duan Xinghui rode beside Ning Shu. Ning Shu asked, "Princess, are you okay?" Ning Shu was already in a bad mood. When she heard Duan Xinghui's words, she felt that this guy was gloating. She said coldly, "What does Guard Duan think I'm not okay?" Chapter 59. Duan Xinghui also knew that there were people in the army who were plotting something. With Princess Jiehui in the army, this group of men became restless. Originally, Duan Xinghui was concerned about her and walked over to ask. However, she bluntly retorted, "What do you think will happen to this princess?" This caused Duan Xinghui's heart to stifle. He was very angry. He was only concerned about her. Why was she looking at him with such vigilant eyes? Princess Jiehui's feelings for him had changed too quickly, causing Duan Xinghui to feel that Princess Jiehui's love for him was like a dream. Duan Xinghui was snubbed. He turned his horse around and left, going to ensure Grand Marshal Shun Feng's safety. The army continued to march forward. After such a long time, Ning Shu found it difficult to endure. They had marched for nearly 10 days. During this time, Ning Shu's thighs had been scraped. Left with no other choice, Ning Shu sewed a soft cushion for himself and tied it to his thighs. Finally, the pain lessened. In addition, some of the men in the army became bolder and bolder. Perhaps they were slowly probing Ning Shu's bottom line. Some of them even had a crazy idea, which was to treat Princess Jiehui as a soldier's prostitute. Ning Shu sneered when she found out. Towards those who approached her tent, no matter who they were, she would give them a good beating. As if they had seen Ning Shu's savagery, these men did not dare to wander around in front of Ning Shu's tent. Even if they passed by, they would be beaten. As a result, Ning Shu's tent became a vacuum. Ning Shu was very satisfied with this. These people were truly despicable. Only when they were ruthless to him would they know fear. The further the army advanced, the more desolate it became. Large tracts of land were uncultivated. Even some of the land that had been planted with grain had been ruined beyond recognition. The Xiongnu and Tatters treated the common people of Great Yang's borders as fat sheep. Once their wool grew, they would harvest it. In the winter, when there was no grain, they would harvest it. Ning Shu's heart was filled with indignation. The Xiongnu Tatars were tall and strong, yet instead of working, they only knew how to plunder. Xin Feng's face was also filled with grief. He stroked his somewhat white beard and looked around. He sighed and said, "The people living at the border are really too bitter." Xin Feng had not seen the hardships of the commoners who were captured by the Tatars. Their clothes were ragged, and their faces were yellow and emaciated. They worked for the Tatars, and the Tatars drank wine and whipped the slaves. Ning Shu's heart was in turmoil. He couldn't wait to fight with these despicable Han people. The closer they got to the border, the heavier the hearts of the soldiers became. The villages here were desolate, and there was basically no one to be seen. Moreover, the closer they got to the border, the more serious the desertification became. Xin Feng found a desolate village to set up camp. In this village, there were only some old, weak, sick, and disabled people. Children who did not have enough clothes to cover their bodies were so cold that their lips had turned purple. Their bodies were covered with some rotten cotton wool, which was simply not enough to cover their bodies. Seeing the army, the people in the village revealed expressions of horror and despair. Even though these soldiers were not wearing Xiongnu clothing, these people were still afraid. Plucking feathers from wild geese, soldiers passing by like combing a comb. This was why these commoners were so panicked and at a loss. Ning Shu felt sour and said to Xin Feng, "Marshal, it's better if we don't enter the village. It's not suitable to disturb the commoners." Xin Feng saw that these people were so frightened that their bodies were trembling. He ordered them to set up camp not far from the village and ordered them not to disturb the commoners. Ning Shu sat in his tent and took off the soft cushion wrapped around his legs. After such a long march, the saddle had already worn out his thighs. Fortunately, there was still a soft cushion, so it did not worsen. Ning Shu sprinkled some medicinal powder on the reddened areas. Suddenly, his ears twitched. He seemed to have heard a woman's cry for help. Ning Shu quickly came out of the tent. At this time, the sky was a little dark. Ning Shu seemed to have heard the sound of horses' hooves. Ning Shu stepped on the trunk and directly climbed up a tree. He looked into the distance and saw less than 20 Xiongnu Tatars riding horses on a dusty road not far away. They were teasing a woman who was running with all her might in front of them. Each of the men's faces revealed extremely cruel and playful smiles. They had the interest of a cat playing with a mouse. Ning Shu circulated his qi and jumped down the tree. He walked directly to the largest tent. He entered the tent and said to Xin Feng, "Marshal, there are traces of Tatars ahead. I hope that Marshal can send a team of soldiers to this general." When Xin Feng heard this, he asked the general in the tent, who was willing to go with the left vanguards. Princess Jiehui's status was the highest after Xin Feng, and these men were not willing to submit to a woman. Seeing these people's attitude, Ning Shu swung his whip and said, "Come with me. If you don't, I'll whip you to death." First, Duan Xinghui stood out. Xin Feng sent a team of nearly 100 people to Ning Shu, and they went in that direction. When they arrived at their destination, Ning Shu saw that these Xiongnu Tatars had actually grabbed the woman and torn her clothes, revealing her white body. A circle of Xiongnu Tatars surrounded the woman. Their unbridled and lewd smiles mixed with the woman's panicked cries and curses. Seeing this scene, Ning Shu's head was about to smoke. He rode over and directly whipped the man who was already on top of the woman. When the man was about to raise his spear, he was suddenly whipped. Moreover, it was on his back. He immediately felt pain in his body. Then he felt his body go numb. Ning Shu's whip directly injured the man's spine. For a moment, he was unable to move. Everyone was shocked by this sudden situation. They stared blankly at the person who had injured the man with the whip. Their eyes were filled with amazement and fear. Ning Shu took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention. He directly straddled the horse's back, bent down, grabbed the woman's arm, and pulled her up onto the horse's back. The woman stared blankly at Ning Shu. She seemed to have fallen into Ning Shu's cold eyes. When the Tatars saw that their spoils of war had been snatched away, they cried out in anger. At the border, The Xiongnu Tatars had always been successful. They had never encountered such a situation. Ningxu took off the red cloak on her back and covered the woman's body. Until now, the woman didn't seem to have reacted. When the cloak covered her body, the woman's body trembled. She lowered her head and didn't speak. After a while, the group behind them caught up. When Duan Xinghui saw the Xiongnu Tatars in front of him, his eyes blazed with hatred. Last time, he had fallen into the trap of these Tatars, causing him to lose his position as general. At first, the Tatars angrily spoke in a language that Ningxu could not understand. Now that so many people had arrived, one of the Tatars stammered in Great Yong's language, "You are not border guards." The border guards of Great Yong were all intimidated by them. When they saw them, they would take a detour. This was why the Tatars were able to act so recklessly on Great Yong territory. Chapter 60. Ningxu narrowed his eyes as he looked at the Tatars in front of him. On Great Yong's territory, they had harmed Great Yong's citizens and raped Great Yong's women. These bandits were so arrogant that Ningxu was so angry that he laughed, especially when he heard one of the Tatars say something about quickly releasing the woman.
"Give that woman to me.
You Great Yong men are even more beautiful than women." A drooling expression appeared on the Tatar's face. Ningxu had not opened his mouth to speak. In addition, he was wearing a helmet. For a moment, it was impossible to tell that Ningxu was a woman. Looking at him, one could tell that he was an extremely beautiful man. Before Ningxu could say anything, Duan Xinghui, who was next to her, shouted, "Impudent thing!
Capture all of these people alive."
Ningxu's voice was clear and cold, but it made the Tatars on the opposite side tremble all over. Their faces showed an expression of extreme enjoyment, as if they had been doused with a bucket of ice water in the hottest days of summer. Looking at Ningxu, their eyes shone, and their saliva was about to flow out. A woman, and an extremely beautiful woman. When the woman in Ningxu's embrace heard Ningxu's voice, she blankly turned her head to look at Ningxu, her eyes shining. Ningxu looked at these Tatars. They had so many people here, yet they were so fearless. He was so angry that he laughed. "Capture all of these bastards for this prince? If this prince doesn't whip these sluts until they call her mother, then she will be unworthy of this prince's title." Duan Xinghui took the lead, and the troops behind him charged forward to fight. Ningxu looked at the chaotic scene. These Tatars were indeed brave. There were more than 100 people here against less than 20 Tatars, and there were even some who were injured. TSK. Ningxu felt very vexed as he watched. Even though the Tatars relied on their physical advantage, they were unable to withstand the large number of people. In a short while, they were captured. However, there was no fear on their faces, and their mouths were still cursing. Ningxu also felt drunk. He swung his hand and whipped the fiercest Tatar. Moreover, he whipped him in the face. Ah! In an instant, blood spurted out from the Tatar's face, and even his eyeballs were blinded. The Tatar covered his face and rolled on the ground in pain. The Hun people who had been cursing suddenly stopped. They looked at Ningxu with unruly eyes, but they stopped cursing. "Take these people away," Ningxu said coldly. However, these Tatars believed that Ningxu did not dare to kill them. Immediately, they began to jump up and down. Ningxu shouted, "Great Yong's cowards! Hurry up and release us. Otherwise, when the time comes, you'll have a good time." The soldiers at the border didn't dare to kill them. They were even more afraid of the revenge of the Northern Desert Cavalry. This was why the Tatars were so fearless even after being captured. Duan Xinghui frowned as he looked at Ningxu. Ningxu whispered, "Princess, if this continues, it will be a blow to the morale of the soldiers." Ningxu looked at Duan Xinghui with disdain, especially when he saw that Duan Xinghui was about to whisper into his ear. Ningxu coldly said, "If you want to talk, then talk. Why are you getting so close?" This sentence sounds familiar. Wasn't this the catchphrase of the school doctor in the previous world? How did she learn it? Duan Xinghui's face was both red and white. For a moment he was speechless. Ning Shu surveyed the soldiers of the Great Yong dynasty. Just a moment ago, they had fought with 20 Tatters and appeared dispirited. Some of them even had injuries. Ning Shu felt extremely vexed when he saw this. He swung his whip, causing it to crack. Especially now that it was winter, it was extremely painful to whip someone. Seeing the whip in Ning Shu's hand, the Tatters involuntarily took a step back. Even the Great Yong soldiers holding the Xiongnu captive took a step back, afraid of being accidentally injured. Ning Shu tilted his head, seeming somewhat puzzled as he looked at the Tatters. Puzzled, he asked, "Who are you going to use as monkeys?" Ning Shu looked at the woman sitting in front of him. Even now, her body was still trembling. In order to flaunt his power over a woman, Ning Shu whipped the Xiongnu closest to him. Moreover, he whipped the Xiongnu in the lower part of the road. Ning Shu dared to guarantee that with this whip, the Tatar would have nothing left. The Tatar who was whipped let out an inhuman cry, lying on the ground and howling in grief. Ning Shu's whip did not stop. Ning Shu clenched her teeth, her body trembling slightly. This was the first time she had killed someone. Moreover, she had to kill someone. This was not only to intimidate the Tatters, but also to intimidate the generals and soldiers of Great Yong. If she truly became weak, not to mention the Tatters, even the men of Great Yong would try to kill her. The final outcome would be even more miserable. Being treated as a soldier to vent his lust, the heavens were high and the emperor was far away. At this time, her status as a princess did not have any deterrence. Ning Shu used all her strength. The Tatar who had been whipped had already stopped breathing. Every time he was whipped by Ning Shu, his body would twitch. His lower part had already been whipped into a bloody mess by Ning Shu. Seeing all of this, Ning Shu's stomach churned. She wanted to vomit, but Ning Shu resisted. Ning Shu looked around at the Tatters. When they met Ning Shu's gaze, the Tatters lowered their heads in fear. Ning Shu then looked at the soldiers in her position. When Ning Shu's gaze swept over them, the soldiers reflexively covered their crotches. Tidy them up. Looking at them affects my mood too much. Once I am in a bad mood. Ning Shu's voice was extremely cold. Immediately, soldiers came over to tidy up the Tatters who had been whipped until they no longer resembled humans. Everyone looked at Ning Shu with fear in their eyes. Ning Shu knew that she was no longer the same. Her hands were already stained with blood. Perhaps in the future, the world would not lack slaughter and blood. Ning Shu could only strengthen her heart. Everything she did must be worthy of her heart. Duan Xinghui also looked at Ning Shu with a complicated expression, especially when he saw her cold and indifferent eyes and the bloody whip in her hand. She looked cruel and evil. Duan Xinghui only felt his heart beating violently in his chest. He couldn't tell what he was feeling. But there was one person who looked at Ning Shu with a different expression. Her eyes were shining with worship and deep envy. Ning Shu looked at her eyes and smiled. She asked aloud, "Do you dare to kill the Tatters? Kill the Tatters who humiliated you just now. Do you dare?" Ning Shu said indifferently, but it made people's hearts tighten. The woman's bronze face was filled with determination and hatred as she said, "The hatred between me and the Tatters is as deep as the sea. The Tatters killed my family. I want to kill the Tatters to avenge my family." The woman took the whip from Ning Shu's hand and walked over to the Tatters who had whipped Ning Shu and was on top of the woman. The Tatter's face trembled and bared his teeth at the woman. The woman used Ning Shu's red cloak to cover her naked body and then waved the whip at the Tatters. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.